So I have a big problem with how we discuss what is and isn't good writing, air quotes, in the anime community online, which is that we too often throw around terms like character development or themes without ever really explaining what these terms mean or why they're important to us. And it does seem like there's some consensus of what anime are well written, like AOT or One Piece, and then which ones aren't, like, I don't know, Solo Leveling or Demon Slayer, depending on who you ask, but it's not usually really explained beyond the characters are deep or the story is about such and such real world thing. That problem is particularly bad in the JJK community, since over here it seems like half the fan base thinks JJK is just fights with no story, and the other half thinks it's a storytelling masterpiece. However, I'm here today to tell you that there are actually ways to study what good writing and good visual storytelling is that are very technical, almost scientific. And in this video, I aim to explain the technical, craft-based reasons why you love the battle in Sendai Colony so much. So as a trial run to prove this video will be worth your time, let's have a quick discussion about fight dialogue, specifically when Kurorushi says this. In a fight, dialogue kind of has to be rushed to keep up with the pace of the action, and it's unrealistic and silly when characters who are like actively trying to kill each other have too much of a conversation because they're preoccupied.
How the fuck you want me to listen to all this and read this shit, bro?
At the same time, we do have to understand the characters' powers and personalities in the fight, especially if it's their first appearance like it is in Sendai. So every sentence they say has to be chock full of information about who they are and what their goals are, while also being as short as possible. So it's a huge problem of efficiency. And it's for that reason that I'm obsessed with the I Like Iron line. I think it's amazing, because it conveys so much information about Kurorushi all at once using only 6 words. Now, first and foremost, of course, is that on a literal level, it's talking about the taste of blood from the humans it consumes. That takes like a second to think about, and then you're like, ugh. Digging in some more, we know curses all speak to different degrees and have different levels of intelligence, partially based on their grade. Low-grade curses usually have like one sentence they spam on repeat. See this curse in episode 1 asking about the time. It's a sentence tied to the place and emotions that it formed from, but it isn't necessarily like a coherent idea. And then on the other end, we have the special grade disaster curses who have full human-like speech, personalities, complex ideologies going on, and Kurorushi falls somewhere between these two. But the choice to have it express its like essential desire to consume shows a level of knowledge much higher than the curse in episode 1. It genuinely asks Yuta why he stopped it from eating the people that he was with in an attempt to understand why it's being kept from its meal. And when Yuta asks basically why it was going to eat the people in the first place, it answers honestly that it likes the taste of iron. From this, we learn that Kurorushi's understanding of human language is pretty rudimentary, much less than the disaster curses, but at the same time, it has a formed concept of self. It knows what it wants to do, eat people, and why it likes the taste of iron, and it's willing to inquire about why Yuta doesn't understand it. That's not like a full-blown philosophical belief by any means, but it is the kind of thing a relatively intelligent animal with language would be able to comprehend. It's feeling a desire and it's wanting to fulfill that desire, and it's capable of expressing that. We might expect a line of dialogue like this from a talking dog waiting for its dinner. Which brings me to my next point, that this line also ties into its physical design. Kurorushi has very human elements to it, like muscular legs and defined arms, but it maintains a thorax, and it has a face like that. So it's maybe mostly buggish with some human touches mixed in there. This, of course, I want to contrast with the mostly humanoid disaster curses, and looking back at the animalistic dialogue, we get this picture that Kurorushi exists in the space between human and creature, and that's really freaky. The dialogue here informs this perfectly then, showcasing that Kurorushi is capable of limited intelligence, but is still motivated by animalistic instinct. That is, genuinely, everything we'd need to know about what Kurorushi is and why it behaves the way it does to understand its role in Sendai, basically written into 6 words. That is masterful. Now, Kurorushi doesn't have any development as a character. Hell, I don't even really know if it relates to the show's themes very directly. But I do know that Kurorushi is what I would consider a well-written character, not because the character itself represents something so amazing about our world or such a complex philosophy, but because the language used to convey the character is incredibly effective. There's stuff like this all over this episode. So today, we're going to discuss the battle in Sendai Colony by examining the technical elements of craft, like well-designed shots, pieces of really great dialogue and writing elements, jujutsu as a power system, and character designs, to find out what the science is behind crafting such an incredible fight. Basically, how we're going to do this is the next segment is going to be me talking about some of the history with Uro and how that was represented in the manga versus the anime, because it's really interesting, and I think it actually does kind of hold the key to understanding how to interpret the works of fiction that we know and love. And then from there, we're actually going to go through the episode, basically like shot by shot, moment to moment, and I'm going to talk about, great shots, moments of great fight choreography, stuff like that, to really get to the bottom of why this episode was so incredible. It's taken me a long time to make this video, as you've probably noticed if you're around here a lot, because I couldn't figure out how I wanted to do this. I hope this format works. Let me know in the comments if it does or doesn't, but we'll start right now into the more standard portion of this video and talk about the Fujiwara clan, who I've been hinting at the lore with since my first video on JJK on this channel, and we're going to learn how to interpret stories. Now, at the beginning of Yuta's fight with Ryu and Uro, he has a conversation with Uro that establishes some light detail on her backstory and introduces her motivations for being in the Culling Games and her conflict with Yuta's ancestors, the Fujiwara clan. But my key to understanding stories isn't even really going to be technically about this dialogue. It's more about the background of where this conversation is happening. In the manga, the scene originally happens on some random nondescript street. The emphasis of the scene is really entirely on the language and on their faces, with most panels being close-ups. However, in the anime, the conversation happens in the Sendai City Museum, a real place in a much more dynamic setting. Shots range from close-ups inspired by the manga to these wider shots in the hallway showing more of the background to even random interspersed shots showing off ancient artworks with neither character even in frame. Now, this may seem like an exaggeration, but genuinely the key to understanding a story like JJK lies in this difference. The key here is the observation that someone, somewhere, actually made the decision to change the setting of this scene. In describing this, I've been using passive language, like in the manga it happens this way, and in the anime it just happens a different way. But that's not what's true. In the manga, the setting was designed to be a certain way, and that was intentionally redesigned to show something else when the anime was being produced. Now, I know that sounds kind of obvious, so we have to go a bit deeper to get to why this is important. And we can do this by asking ourselves why someone would make that change. Well, this is where we get into our history and story stuff for some context. The Fujiwara clan discussed here was a powerful family that took over Japan's government during the Heian era, which is stated to be the golden age of Jujutsu and is when Sukuna lived, going from 794 to 1185 AD, and for an anime reference point, Vinland Saga is set in 1013 AD, so that's what's going on in European history at this time for context, I guess. The Heian is known as the era of clan rule in Japan, and though Japan did have its own formal imperial government, it was kind of really run from the shadows by a group of 4 powerful clans who were each vying for political control throughout the era. They rose to power and became extremely rich, basically after buying up a bunch of previously public farmland and making peasants work it, and then paying them very slim cuts of the profit from the land. I oversimplified that so much. I'm not a big history buff, but that's the easiest way to understand it. These clans, the Taira, Minamoto, Tachibana, and the most powerful Fujiwara, are the basis for the clan system in JJK, and actually the clan system in Naruto as well. Uro claims that she spent her life working as a secret assassin for the Fujiwara in their Sun, Moon, and Star squad, and she ultimately was executed as cover to protect a member of the Fujiwara who had killed another Fujiwara clan member. Now that's really all that we had confirmed about her in the dialogue in the manga at the time, which does build a pretty interesting picture of a woman who lived in the shadows of this great clan's empire, finally getting a chance to live free and make a name for herself in the Culling Games. But in the anime, we get a much more interesting picture of her life and the politics of the time through the art in this museum. What am I talking about? Well, for example, we get 2 matching shots of her and Yuta close up, basically at the beginning of their conversation, standing in front of dioramas of ancient Japanese life. The one behind Yuta depicts some kind of wealthy palace or shrine. We can see the really crazy architecture that characterized luxury at this time. But on Uro's side, we see what seems to be a countryside farming village. Similarly, we get contrasting paintings behind the two of them during their walk and talk through the back of the gallery. The paintings on Yuta's side depict beautiful, bright-colored birds and well-dressed noblewomen, and it ends on a painting resembling this painting that I found of a Fujiwara clan leader wearing his full, traditional uniform. On the other hand, Uro's side features darker nature imagery, replacing Yuta's colorful birds with crows and pairing them with images representing disease, starvation, and death. Now, it's also important to note here that most of the history we have about the Heian era comes from art made by the clans. They experienced extreme wealth during this period and used the wealth to spend their time performing complex religious rituals, making and seeing plays, developing philosophy, painting, and writing literature. And a lot of these paintings and pieces of literature are like the main ways that we can understand what life was like in the Heian era. Actually, the famous book, The Tale of Genji, came out during this period and was actually maybe written by a Fujiwara under a pen name. So yeah, visually, the village behind Uro takes her personal experience of oppression by the clan and then ties her to the peasant class at this time, confirming that she was definitely not herself a Fujiwara, so, it's not like a Maki situation, but instead she was likely sold to them or taken from her home because of her technique. Now, not to get too woke too early in the video, but this is pretty clearly a representation of how, throughout history, extreme wealth has always been derived from the exploitation of the work done by poor laborers. Uro has experienced the Jujutsu version of labor exploitation, coming from a background of poverty and strife in the countryside, which we see represented in the art she's paired with, and then forced to fight tirelessly for Yuta's ancestors in the shadows. Remember that the clans likely got as rich as they did by commercializing farmlands that were previously publicly worked and profited on in the previous Nara era. Kinda, again, just know I'm simplifying this a little bit, but basically, Yuta's ancestors were the direct cause of the implied poverty of Uro's ancestors. The paintings show the horrible conditions of the poor at this time, starving and dying quietly in the background while the Fujiwara clan built its empire on their backs. Uro's art is the art of poverty and suffering, while Yuta's art is the art of those who benefit from that. And remember, all of that extra information came from the initial change. The nearly blank background of the manga gives no new information to us, directing all of our focus onto Uro's hints at her backstory and the way Yuta seems to accidentally strike a nerve in their conversation, which we'll get into her reaction in the next section. From their talk, we know she was an assassin and she was mistreated by the clan, and we know she was reincarnated to reclaim her fate and make a real name for herself. But we don't know any specifics about her background or how it shaped her. While in the anime, the diorama and the paintings confirm key elements of who she is and direct us toward a clearer political idea this character is representing. Analyzing art like this is all about analyzing choices. And when you see a scene like the museum, it's important to remember that the characters aren't just happening to exist in a museum. Someone had to choose to put them there and do the work of drawing all these paintings into the background. Knowing this, we can understand the elements of art as not just objects that exist in a fixed world, like the trees outside our house might be, but as intentionally incorporated elements that were put into the story to show us something about the character's created world or the real world we live in. Whenever something happens on screen, whenever somebody says anything, the question needs to be, why did someone choose to make them say that? How does that connect to the other things that that person chose to put into the story? And then ultimately we can find our way back to, how do all of these choices align into a coherent statement that connects to our real world, if they do at all? Now let's put that into practice and analyze some elements of craft by going through this episode. I think skipping the intro, we're going to hop in right before Yuta's about to fight Kurorushi. Okay, folks, welcome back to the second half of the video, the craft analysis. So this is where we're going to be really getting into the stuff that I was talking about with like the Kurorushi, I like the taste of iron, breaking down good pieces of dialogue like that, good character design moments, and good shots throughout this episode to really understand why it feels as good as it does while we're watching it. This is a new thing for me, so, let me know how well this format works. I have this new little drawing tool. Switch to my pen here. Ooh, wow, drawing, very nice. Let me add some eyes. Kind of looks like Ditto. Yeah, so this is a new thing that I'm trying out, and this is going to be kind of like a scene-by-scene walkthrough of everything that was happening in this episode. Now, I'm starting us on this shot because I think it does a lot of good things. Number one, it's a nice character moment for Yuta. We see him looking to help people escape the culling games, which both, is just like another nice, good guy Yuta moment, but also ties in the fact that a lot of regular human society is getting caught into the culling games, whether it's season 3, part 2, or season 4, whatever. That's going to be a big part of the rest of the culling games arc, is how human society gets wrapped into it. So showing Yuta actually helping these people out is kind of a reminder that regular human society is being affected by this too, not just Jujutsu society. It's also nice because I think Gege and Mappa made a great choice by including these two babies in this group of people. Having 2 kids and a young mother adds a lot of stakes to Kurorushi's appearance because we know it's going to try and eat them after we see it eat the 2 guys. Seeing just regular adults like this doesn't have as much impact as having these 3 here, we really want to see these three make it out okay. So a good choice to include them. That's, again, another one of those things that doesn't come up when you talk about writing in terms of like the big themes and whatever, but is still a good choice, and I would consider an element of good writing. Now, I want to establish a little bit of vocabulary when we're talking about film stuff. I'm a creative writing major. I didn't even finish my film minor, so I don't fully know what I'm talking about here, but I'm going to give it my best shot to explain some film terminology. We'll start with a pretty standard one here, the rule of thirds. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with this, even if you're not film people at all, because it's a pretty basic filmmaking rule. It's where you think about the screen as split into 3 sections horizontally, as so, and also 3 sections vertically. If I can draw a straight line, this is kind of becoming a theme on this channel that I can't draw straight lines with my touchpad. That's not terrible. Those are pretty even thirds. But yeah, it's a way of thinking of breaking up the shot to put emphasis on certain spaces that are happening in the shot in front of us. So a good example here, because we see there's 3 people on this side of Yuta and the young mother and 3 people on this side as well. These guys are all lined up shoulder to shoulder, so they take up a lot of space, bleeding over into this middle third, from the left third all the way into the middle third, while these 3 don't even fill up the entire right third. So for this reason, we kind of feel like the space is getting compressed a little bit in this direction. Now, traditionally, like the most basic standard vanilla shot would take Yuta, who is like the main subject of the scene, and place him in the middle of the middle third so that our eyes kind of just naturally drop onto this space where he's supposed to be, taking up, the center of the frame. But since we see everything kind of shifted to the right visually with where these people are lined up, Yuta actually also ends up getting shifted to the right, and he ends up kind of on this line of the right third, which is kind of a lot more dynamic. The fact that this is all negative space, space just kind of filled by nothing, is actually really visually interesting, because we're kind of expecting one of our subjects of the scene to be framed up in here. And funnily enough, it ends up being this girl who's kind of the closest to being in that perfect middle third position on the scene, which is, again, kind of emphasizing the fact that these are the people in the scene who we're kind of supposed to be worrying about. The other thing that I kind of want to establish here is how we think about camera. Obviously, there's no camera here. This is a piece of animation. This is all drawn on. It's not a real shot. We all know that. But we still use the word camera to describe our perspective. So all we're talking about with that is probably our relation to where the characters are and where the shot is. In this instance, we can kind of tell that their butts are all kind of close to the bottom of the middle of the screen, their heads kind of breaking into the top third of the screen. So we kind of get this sense that they are standing above us, like the camera is low to the ground, probably closer to in line with this girl's head, looking up at everybody in the scene, kind of placed above us. Also, I just noticed that this girl's design looks exactly like Ozawa, and that, I think, is pretty funny because she is from Sendai. And yeah, next thing I want to talk about here, this is going to seem a bit random, but it's this shot of Yuta running. This is kind of just one of the ways that they choose to represent speed in this episode. You see the blurred background giving us that sense of us, we're flying by. Yuta's posture nice and low to the ground. When he initially leaps out, we see that his head was really close to the camera because it kind of feels like he's advancing on us when he gets up close like that. So this is a great example of how you can represent speed for a character. These lines here really giving that sense of momentum, but we're actually going to talk about a way that they do it a lot more effectively in a minute later on. Then we get this moment here, which is just like disturbing, the bugs flying out of his body. We're introduced to Kurorushi as just kind of this amorphous blob of cockroach, and then see him kind of devour this guy in this really grotesque way. The whole thing about Kurorushi is kind of the mystery of what it is and what it's doing and what its goals are. And you'll see in the coming shots that that's kind of the emphasis on Kurorushi's introduction. Cursed Spirit being a player in the Culling games is just such an outlier thing that Kurorushi has a lot of intrigue, and we're kind of supposed to be frightened by the mystery and the grotesqueness of it. But yeah, Rika smacks it down, peak animation there. Seems like the people get away. And then the next shot that I want to talk about is what happens here. Now, there's a lot that we can say about it. I didn't talk about framing in the last shot, though I totally could have, because the overpass is kind of looming over the people, and it gives that sense that they're hiding. We get a similar effect here with this bridge kind of containing Kurorushi and keeping it in the shadows. So we get the sense that it is kind of also trying to hide, keep itself from being discovered, and let the cockroaches do the work for the main body. We also get to see very few of its features, just these weird antenna things, and its glowing eyes, and then the body and the cloak adding to that sense of mystery and grotesqueness, fitting into the idea of a cockroach kind of hiding in a dark space in your house and, crawling out to eat. I also really wanted to talk about this shot because, first off, it's just gorgeous. I love all the different levels in here. Another thing we'll talk about a lot is depth of field, so we can see what's close to us. We can imagine, again, the camera position behind Yuta, low to the ground, because this grass is all big and in high detail and in our face. And, we see as things get farther away from us, they lose detail and they get smaller. That's depth of field. We've all taken first grade art class before. But I like how many levels there are in this shot. So we see this kind of on the hill where Yuta is, a lower level of grass, path, another lower level of grass, the river, and then it comes back up, grass, and then bridge stuff up into here. I think that's just makes a shot very visually interesting, all these different layers going on here. But what I really want to talk about is the perspective. When we're kind of behind Yuta looking over his shoulder like this, we can consider ourselves as being kind of in Yuta's perspective. Now, this is kind of a tricky thing because a lot of the fight is going to end up being in Yuta's perspective because he's like the protagonist for this episode, but it flips around a lot. JJK does something pretty important with flipping perspective that I'll talk about later when we get to Ryu and Uro. But there are different times where we'll be looking at different characters from the perspective, air quotes, of different characters. There's one shot where it's actually the first person perspective of Uro that we'll talk about later. But in this case, we're kind of third person over his shoulder, like in a video game or like in other movies where they would do over the shoulder shots for conversation. So traditionally in other movies, you'll see this a lot where it's, one character over here is talking to Yuta. I'm such a gifted artist. And we would be looking over Yuta's shoulders at them so that we can see their face and see them talking, almost like we're in a conversation with them. And then when Yuta starts talking, the camera would flip, end up positioned over this character's shoulder, and then we would be looking back at Yuta. So by being over his shoulder looking down at Kurorushi like this, we get kind of that sense of the conversational perspective that would happen in a traditional film. I promise I'll stop pausing every 2 seconds in a minute, but just because we're still establishing kind of our vocabulary here and going through stuff, we can see there's a natural rule of thirds created by the shot here with these bridge supports kind of drawing the horizontal thirds lines, and then the bridge itself kind of drawing the line for the very straight line that I'm adding in there, the very straight line for the top third. So if we extend the thirds thing, it kind of looks like this. Again, horribly drawn. Why is this middle third so skinny? Why is this bottom one so big? Whatever. But we can see that these two are now kind of in that traditional framing that I was talking about earlier, occupying the dead middle of the screen. And the rest of the screen is very interesting, but mostly blank. We get the skybox here in this top third where we can see the stadium in the background and the cityscape, very nice sky, but it's a lot of negative space up here, nothing too much to pay attention to. The foreground is very beautifully drawn, but there's nothing particularly interesting happening, so our focus is kind of getting sucked into this middle area. And we can also see how a lot of the lines in the scene are working towards that as well. Following up the riverbanks, we kind of get this natural line there and this natural line there that sort of funnel our vision in toward these two. And that builds a lot of momentum for the next scene. It's kind of a brief pause. We get to rest for a moment before the action is going to begin for what is essentially the rest of the episode. Yuta steps back, draws his sword, and then the fight begins. Then we get a really interesting sequence here where we see, first off, the Festering Life Sword. Another great writing craft decision to give this a name. It's a good world building thing. We don't really find out anything about the Festering Life Sword or why it gets a name, but having a name makes it feel like it's a real artifact of the JJK universe, like this is something we should care about, like it's something with history. It's something that Gege is really good at, which is building lore without building lore. A lot of it depends on the Heian era history, so the lore is actually kind of there. But it is really good when a writer can just suggest that there is lore, even if they don't know exactly what it would be. If Gege has no idea what the origin of this sword is, it's something that we can still kind of imagine for ourselves and imagine that it has some kind of importance in the JJK universe. Even if, again, it doesn't. It just makes the story feel a lot more deep, like there's a lot of history behind it. Then we get two back-to-back shots of a close-up of Kurorushi and a close-up of Yuta before they're about to launch into the fight. A nice moment to get up close and personal into both of their headspaces before everything pops off moments later. The next thing I want to talk about is the choreography of this fight. So we start with Kurorushi sliding across the water and coming in and making first contact with Yuta here. We're actually going to break down this shot just a little bit too. Just talking about the lines of the characters here. This shot is, this is one of my favorite shots from the whole episode. It's pretty simple, but it's just like incredible. The intensity and the like momentum generated between the two characters when you draw them kind of angled in toward each other in this way, both in these really athletic stances, knees crossing, basically looking each other dead in the eye. And then we get these nice water droplets in the foreground. Another great camera moment. We can imagine ourselves kind of literally laying down in the river looking up at these two. It makes them look like giants. But what I really want to talk about this moment here is the fact that Yuta's first move is a down slash with the sword. That's going to matter a lot. As they come together, Yuta slashes down, and I want us to kind of keep this momentum in mind as we go through the next couple shots here. He slashes down and takes off Kurorushi's arm. In the subsequent shot, we see him turn here. So he's slashed down and across the body, and he turns and throws his sword into Kurorushi's, pinning it onto the wall. After which he lands this big elbow and sends Kurorushi flying. We got to go back through that for a second. So if we track Yuta's momentum throughout the shot, he goes down. At this point, we can imagine he's taken this right arm here. He's sliced it down across Kurorushi's body. He's now whipped himself around to make this throw. And then in the following shot here, he's turned back in and landed an elbow. So this right arm has traveled, if we can draw it out, down across Kurorushi's body. It's come around to throw the sword. It's like somewhere around here. And then has whipped back up and landed in Kurorushi's chest. That is incredible fight design. The sense of momentum of Yuta's body turning into Kurorushi is something that we can genuinely like feel as viewers. The realistic step 1, step 2, step 3 of disarming, pinning, and then attacking Kurorushi is something that we can logically follow as viewers that allows us to kind of mentally engage with a scene like this on a different kind of level. This is something I'll talk about a couple more times, but the fact that they keep track of this in a very realistic way not only makes the fight feel more realistic, but feels grounded in a way that we can actually intellectually engage with it. Something that happens a lot in anime is that fights turn into just like blurs of hands, and JJK even does this sometimes, especially in the earlier seasons. Just blurs of hands and feet and big explosions. And while sometimes it does look cool, we kind of lose a sense of what the characters are doing specifically. So there's no sense that they're pulling off really cool moves or employing really good martial arts or stuff like that. But being able to see the actual step-by-step process and having it realistically tracked, like a fight in real life would, he would to land this elbow, he would have to turn his body in this way. It allows us to kind of get on the level of almost mentally participating in the story. Again, we're going to come back to that more concretely when we talk about the power system and domain expansion in particular, and I promise I'll stop pausing every 2 seconds. So yeah, then they have this conversation when Yuta is standing on the pole. This is where we get the "I like the taste of iron" line. Kurorushi says, "Why do you interfere?" We already went over that conversation. Yuta also foreshadows that he's going to use reverse curse technique in the kiss moment. That's something that gets more explained in the manga, but you kind of have to just figure it out on your own in the anime. So it's good that they give a little bit of a hint there beforehand. But yeah, that they launch back into fighting. And this is where we get the speed shot that I want to talk about. So we see this moment where it looks a little bit more like the original one where the background's blurring again. We see, the lines here kind of fading away and the water just being kind of a blank blue surface with some light marks in it. And he takes off like this. But then we get the shot that matters way, way, way more, in my opinion, which is this one of Yuta actually running down the river. This is so effective because as we see these cockroaches kind of spilling all over the banks of the river and Yuta presumably somewhere up in the front heading along, we actually get like a nice concrete sense of scale. This is why cities are usually used in media like this. Like in Godzilla, everything happens in cities. I mean, partially because of the nuclear bomb allegory, but also partially because it gives you a sense of how tall Godzilla is when it's towering over skyscrapers. In this one, we get the sense of scale because we can see, this apartment building, however many stories that is, and these blocks of the streets and the size of this park. The width of the road is something that we can concretely imagine. We've been on roads this size before. We can picture the actual space that this occupies. So when we see the roaches moving down the river at the rate that they are compared to their surroundings, we actually have like a concrete sense of scale. Whether this is probably, I don't know, a mile-ish of river accounting for the bend and stuff. And we can see that they cover it in literally seconds, which is what makes this scene, I think, when I was watching reactors and when I watched this myself, because usually when I watch these episodes, I watch them, 10 times before I write my script, and then I watch a couple different reactors watch it so I can get a sense of what people are talking about. And this is one of the ones that I feel like everybody was like, oh my gosh, look at how fast Yuta's going, because you can see the speed compared to a cityscape. It's not just against like a blurred background. you really get that concrete sense of space and distance that it's really hard to capture in something like this. And then again, as he's kind of flying along the building here, and then Kurorushi is pulling up and like devouring the building with the cockroaches, this scale is also something that we can concretely picture. I mean, we can look at this building and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-story building. And this is how many cockroaches are here, that they're totally engulfing a 13-story building. 13 stories is something that we know the size of, that we can envision in real life. These cars are things that we can envision in real life. So seeing Kurorushi's cockroaches compared to something that we can concretely visualize gives us a much more concrete sense of Kurorushi, the fictional character's scale against our real world. It's an incredible use of cityscape here. And that's both a merit of the visual design and then also the writing room design choices to include a sequence like this. I mean, talk about another gorgeous shot here. I don't think I really need to break this one down much, but you know, there's not too much going on. Another one where is actually an interesting foreground-background dynamic happening here because, of course, Yuta is our foreground main subject, perfectly framed up in the middle if you wanted to rule of thirds this up. And then we have this big dynamic moving structure in the background with kind of the flat cityscape also going on in the background, revealing certain portions of that. But really, it's just the animation of the detail with all of these things flying around him, with the grass moving, with all of the individual pieces of his hair moving. It's just gorgeous. Yuta does his like big pink burst shit, and then Kurorushi sneaks up on him with the two, whatever these gross, nasty things are, which leads into, I think, maybe my favorite shot from this episode. This one here of Kurorushi looming over Yuta. I mean, this is where my technical knowledge fails me to explain how cool this is. In terms of character writing purposes, again, I fall back on the human versus creature dynamic with Kurorushi that exists, because on the one hand, perfectly setting up a surprise attack like that is a very human, conscious being thing to do. But at the same time, the way it pounces out of the grass is almost lion-like. The size of it is bestial in its own way. These arms are kind of human, but they're not quite right. The joints are too weird. There's like 2 biceps before it hits an elbow. The eyes are kind of not even necessarily trained on Yuta. They're sort of just all around a super freaky design, but then the way that it actually kind of wraps around Yuta, you can see like the arm kind of hooks here. This one kind of hooks here. It's cloak blotting out the whole entirety of the background. It kind of has already enveloped Yuta in a way with the shape of its body. It feels like he's already in Kurorushi's grasp, and like at any moment, these arms are going to close down and destroy him. I think that the shot is just absolutely incredible. This is one of my favorite ones from the whole episode. The way it makes Kurorushi feel like a predatory animal pouncing on its prey is just immaculate. Advancing here, they have their little sword exchange, which Kurorushi wins, at which point it turns back around, grabs up Yuta, and is about to eat him. Again, another great shot. We could draw all over this if we wanted to. Again, I actually think this one might be worth rule of thirdsing, at least on the horizontal plane. This is one where we feel all of the negative space in the scene is happening behind Yuta here. There's just barely a little bit of room to breathe in this right third. The right third here is almost just Yuta, and then like a tiny bit of breathing room behind him. And the other 2/3 are all just the mass of Kurorushi, totally tilting this frame in Yuta's direction. We feel this sensation of being squeezed to the boundary of the frame, which gives that sense of Kurorushi's like imposing physical figure, and also gives that sense of constriction as it's kind of choking Yuta out. And then, you know, the eyes tilting down onto him here, his face of just, they do so many good facial expression things in this episode. We'll talk about it a lot with Uro, but his face and just pure like agony here, and Kurorushi's mouth hanging open. It's just disturbing. This is so freaky. I love this. It's awesome. And then, of course, the kiss. Just another incredible. We could rule of thirds this up. We can talk about foreground and background and all the kind of negative space here in the front where there's absolutely nothing happening, and just the understated cityscape in the back. The moment where the wind kind of just rustles before Kurorushi explodes. It's amazing. For those who don't know, also, the manga explains it, but the reason Yuta does that is because apparently brain and hands is like kind of, I guess, genesis point of where he's making his reverse curse technique. So the quickest way to get reverse curse technique into Kurorushi's body is to just get his brain and hands as close to it as possible. And so getting like inside of its mouth is like his best option there, which is just super gross. I love it for Yuta's character too, because he's already got this weird kind of gross love thing going on with Rika, and adding this moment into it was just another great choice by Gege to kind of thematically support Yuta's whole weird relationship to love and I guess now physical intimacy through this. So just incredibly cool. Of course, Kogane coming in and just announcing it, and then boom, straight into Uro. Just incredible. Uro's technique, I think a lot of people got confused by because they're thinking about it as playing more with air than playing with light. The reason why it feels like she appears out of nothing there isn't because she's like flying in or anything per se, like that's a speed thing. It's literally because she's, you know, warping light around her body, and we'll see that more, especially in the art gallery and stuff. But that's why she essentially like looks invisible and then pops up out of nowhere. But I mean, another thing about Jujutsu Kaisen that I just love is the realism. With Jujutsu Kaisen, everybody always jokes about it. It's like Jump Jujutsu Kaisen, and there's never a fair fight in Jujutsu Kaisen. And that is true because Jujutsu Kaisen is really trying to emphasize that these characters actually want to kill each other, and the fights are supposed to be semi-realistic. The inclusion of the rules about how barrier techniques work and who wins domain clashes and the interactions between certain curse techniques are all so meticulously explained and are all so hyper-realistic so that we can see that the character's actions are truly being determined by the most efficient path to winning a fight. Uro doesn't think she can beat Kurorushi, and so her best moment is to jump in immediately after Kurorushi goes down. In another anime, maybe Uro would have tried to 2v1 Yuta with Kurorushi, or maybe he would have had a minute to recover afterwards before fighting Ryu and Uro at once, but that would be an inefficient decision for Uro to make if she's genuinely trying to kill Yuta. So we see her like pop up and Fortnite third party him immediately after Kurorushi goes down. From there, Yuta totally gets launched across the map. We see her technique used for the first time as his fist kind of bends around her, and then they end up in the art museum. Again, something that I covered pretty heavily at the beginning of the video. I'm going to need to start moving this along because I'm only 5 minutes and 24 seconds through this 28-minute episode. Her technique reveal here is awesome, though, so I've got to talk about it. This is what we're talking about when we mean bending light around her. We see her literally pulling the imagery from the painting over here around and across her body. Again, it's kind of that like maintenance of momentum thing that happens with Yuta earlier. Her voice actress also just knocked this out of the park. She sounds incredible. I love Uro's character design too. They really went for like a super high feminine style with her, with the, you know, giant pink and purple hair, the really well done makeup, the intense eye, and then the heavy red lipstick, the big ass earrings, the choker. I think a lot of her character is just really heavily leaning into like a super feminine aesthetic, which is intentionally contrasted with Ryu's hyper masculine aesthetic when he's got, you know, the old school rocker outfit and he's, you know, smoking cigs and he's got, you know, the abs and the muscles and stuff. They kind of have a nice dichotomy going there between like hyper feminine and hyper masculine aesthetics. So we've already talked about the significance of these paintings in the background here a little bit. We get a great moment where Yuta is talking about, you know, you didn't have any friends or lovers until, or I didn't have any friends until recently. Do you have any friends and lovers? Whatever, you know, I can't empathize with somebody who's not worried about their relationships to other people. And this is what I was talking about with, we're going to get into facial expression later, because this is just like an awesome shot on, you know, the technical level where the focus is kind of just on her and we get the paintings really faded in the background. We don't get like a ton of close-up shots in this episode compared to, I think, other episodes and like what you would kind of expect. But when they're used here, they're used really well. Most of this hallway conversation is like wide shots where you can see most of their body and like a large piece of background, but that's not the case for this one. And I think it's such a great character choice that after Yuta says that stuff about her not having any friends or lovers, instead of jumping to anger or, you know, explaining her frustrations with the world or whatever, which is kind of where Uro will go for the rest of the episode. She'll go to that emotional place where she's just enraged and is like rejecting the Fujiwara clan and her upbringing. She instead goes to a surprise reaction here. We can see, you know, the raised eyebrow. I'm itching to use this drawing thing, so I'm going to just draw on her face now because it's fun. We see the raised eyebrow. You know, the eyes kind of aren't really in the angry slant fully yet. They're like a little bit more neutral. Her mouth is kind of just open a little bit. She looks kind of taken aback by the fact that I'm drawing on your face. Woo, woo, woo. She looks kind of just taken aback by the fact that Yuta just said something that would so specifically irk her based on her backstory. Her next line of dialogue here, it's like he's tracing my trigger. Again, really intentionally, that she's not jumping to anger. She's surprised by how accurately he's hitting at the things that she is like most deeply insecure and upset about in her life. And of course, that's the case. He's hitting at these things so accurately, and she's so shocked and kind of upset by that because ultimately it's the connection between these two here. Yuta is maybe, I don't know, we're going to go over a little bit more of the lore, I guess, at the end of this video, but is maybe a descendant of the Fujiwara clan. So he kind of has, in a way, born into him a lot of the same conflict that somebody, whatever Fujiwara clan leader it is depicted in this painting. Yuta has a lot of the stuff going on in his brain that this guy would have had back in the day. So it's not just a coincidence that he said the perfect thing to piss her off. She's realizing in the moment that he said the perfect thing to piss her off because he is the exact person who her anger has been formed against. And it's only after that moment when she kind of has that realization where Yuta is paired up with the painting of the Fujiwara clan leader, and she makes that mental connection where she changes from surprise that he's hitting on these really deep things about her psyche to rage in realization of why he's able to just kind of naturally hit these deep things about her psyche that really bother her. I'm also going to play this clip with audio because such a cool thing. So when you see the kind of distortion of color behind her, you start to get this vibe that like she's snapping, her powers are just bursting out of her because all of this like random color warping is going on. And then you get the effect, glass break, pure white behind her. Such a great moment to exemplify the mental snap, and having it tie into her powers in that way is so cool. I also wanted to play this for you because her theme music and the voice acting here is awesome. So I might have to kind of like black out part of the screen so that this doesn't get copyrighted again. But I mean, come on. Like, you can hear the like Japanese folk music inspiration behind the theme that plays when she starts fighting, which is just, I mean, the tie into her past and the time period she's from. This is a hilarious screenshot to stop on, but her like, bending Yuta's arm around, her powers are super cool. But having like the traditional folk sounds incorporated into what is ostensibly her theme song at this point in time, I can't wait until the soundtrack for this season fully drops on April 15th. I'm filming this on the 11th. I'm assuming that this video will come out after the 15th, but like, wow, this, I mean, just an incredible song choice. It fits her character perfectly. The voice acting is just wild. It's a great choice too for having her be like the kind of hyper feminine design character, to have a voice that's not more masculine, but definitely deeper and kind of gruffer when she's talking. And a lot of the phrases that she uses are just like, I guess you would associate more traditionally with masculinity. So a nice contrast there for her character. I love Uro. I think it might be a controversial take, but I kind of like her more than Ryu. I know most people like Jade and Juliet more, but this might be my JJK hot take for the day. I think she's awesome. Okay, now I said the Kurorushi thing might have been my favorite shot. This is my favorite shot from this episode. Okay, I said the Kurorushi thing was maybe my favorite shot from the episode. This definitely is it. I like, this is just unbelievable stuff. First off, we talked about framing a little bit with Kurorushi under the bridge. We've got a great framing thing here going on with this pole. So not only is this a support that Uro is standing on, it's also kind of closing in the frame. And again, creating this angle that's sort of taking us away from this direction and pointing us into the space that Ryu's cursed energy is coming from. Just really nice stuff there. The different levels that are happening here, the parking lot and the buildings, the natural like crossing line created by the highway, and the interesting dynamic of the river flowing underneath it. Then all of this space in the city back here, really nice. The stadium, which is such a point of emphasis because we know that this is where the people that Yuta is trying to protect are. Our eyes are kind of brought over here, kind of by the open space in front of it. And then we see, the giant structure that's so important to what's going on. The dust cloud eating up so much space on the screen, giving that sense of the scale of destruction that Ryu is outputting in relation to the city. Again, using the cityscape as kind of a teach tool for how their powers are working and how they're moving. This giant, telephone tower in the foreground. It's just so many different elements going on here, all kind of expressing this really dynamic cityscape that feels so alive and so deep because there's so many. I mean, I didn't even talk about these houses over here. There's this little village. I mean, there's just so much happening on screen, so much detail that makes the Sendai colony feel like such an alive city. And then we get obviously the beautiful display of Ryu's cursed energy just totally pouring out from his position across the city, which on one hand frames up for when Yuta is going to go run over here and try and get to Ryu. It's going to, kind of show us the distance that he has to close in order to do that. But at the same time, this is also kind of re-emphasizing the scale of destruction and the scale of Ryu's power. He's this far away, and he just made that big of an impact on the area where they were just fighting over here. And, not even to mention Uro just kind of in the foreground here, looking out across this whole cityscape. Like, I could fanboy over this shot for 5 hours. The amount of detail and the meaningfulness of that detail is just so special. Okay, I'll promise I'll stop pausing every 2 seconds at some point during this, but I just got up for a little break, so now I'm like back in the mode. Talking about the cityscape again here, I won't draw all over this one, but this time we see a difference with the blur effect with Yuta running, where it is blurred, but it's blurred on a very detailed background as opposed to the really washed out ones from earlier in the sequence. We get a lot of detail about what's going on around here. The cars in the parking lot, all these fences and all this going on. Again, such a strong sense of cityscape. And then the beams rising out of the background, again in context next to the buildings with the sense of scale. This is beautiful stuff. It's incredible fight design. And I mean, I talk about just another great sequence of dialogue. Yuta telling him to fight a little bit more discreetly in consideration of the people he was trying to hide. And then Ryu, would you tell a kid at a feast to slow down and take his time eating? First off, this being like the first like really nice close up that we get of Ryu not using his powers is great. The look of, the totally indignified look. The fact that he's kind of got this like eyeliner effect going on here, the big fur coat, the rockabilly pompadour or whatever this is called. Ryu has the aesthetic of like a punk rocker from like the 70s. And I think it's so awesome. Again, leaning into the hyper masculine persona with the really muscular frame. He's a big guy. He's got this super sharp angular jawline, where Uro is like hyper feminine, Ryu hyper masculine, and really pulling into the aesthetics of punk rock and the culture around it. I think let me do a Google here and make sure that I'm right. Okay, so I just did this Google in the middle of this. Shout out to 50sweb.com. I hope no crazy ads pop up here. But I was just thinking about the pompadour because it's such an interesting character choice. Like, that's the most outstanding thing about him, obviously, and his whole powers go through it. And so I just kind of gave it a quick Google. So I know it's called a rockabilly pompadour because I've seen people talking about it on YouTube. So I went in and just did this quick search and found this stupid 50s site or whatever. But they were talking about how the pompadour originated in 18th century France. We have confirmed later, I don't think in like this sequence at all, but definitely later in the manga, that Ryu is from the Edo period, which is 18th century, is square in the middle of the Edo period. So really funny that the pompadour is from that time period, and also at the same time is referential to clearly what's connected to Ryu's character here, the kind of early rock and roll scene. I think I said punk a minute ago, but that's probably not accurate. I think punk's a little bit later than this. But it's related to the early rock and roll scene. And the kind of masculinity that came out of that movement was honestly like a little bit non-traditional. It was like so controversial for the time. Elvis and all this is popping onto the scene for the first time, and it's expressing a new kind of way to be considered masculine that's not so, necessarily in line with the real old school duty oriented version of masculinity, but one that's much more expressive, much more art focused, much more like open with sexuality, which I think ends up being a really interesting thing with his obsession with desserts and sweetness and, getting a little extra onto his life, which seemed like a good, honorable, noble, regular life to have lived, right? He settled down with a nice woman, he fought some strong guys, and that he should have been satisfied with, but he wanted something that was a little bit more passionate, something that was a little bit more fulfilling on kind of a higher level that traditional life didn't provide for him. So you could see kind of the mirroring aesthetics of the early rock movement being a very non-traditional musical movement, and then the connections of Pompadour to France and the time period lining up with the Edo, just such a like interesting connections going on there. Ultimately, I think that his like rocker persona is supposed to, be referential to that, kind of new masculine, rejecting that real duty-oriented traditionalist mindset and, opening yourself up to a more free perspective of what your goals in life are supposed to be that aren't so rooted in traditional ideas of gender, which is something that's so important to this season of JJK. Of course, Kirara being like one of the key examples of rejecting like traditional ideas about gender, but Hikari definitely doing it by being in a relationship with Kirara, and Maki killing the Zenin clan. The Culling Games is like gender commentary all the time, and Ryu, awesome. That's a really fun connection I didn't know about until right now sitting down making this, so that fun to kind of discover that little one live. But yes, the point here, the dialogue, super funny. Would you tell a kid to not eat his fill at a feast? And Yuta, wouldn't anyone? And Ryu immediately folding, right, I guess you would. Super funny, adds so much personality, where we see Uro kind of having something that I wish I talked about a little bit more in that segment, but fuck it, we're just doing it. Uro's like internal monologue is a little bit more angry and more forward and aggressive than what she's like externally saying to Yuta, so we feel that little bit of imbalance, the performance, and then like the secret rage behind the mask. I think it's really funny that Ryu's dialogue is just so straightforward and earnest. He makes this little conversational mistake, and it's like you get the sense that he's not the smartest dude on planet Earth, but like he's not a dumb guy, he's just a bit silly. It's again a very simple exchange, but it gives us such a clear picture of kind of who Ryu is as a guy. It infuses a little bit of humor into this really tense scene. It's great stuff. I love this line of dialogue too. After Ryu does his little monologue being like, there was no dessert in my life or whatever, we get just "here it comes" from Yuta as he locks in, which is contrasted with Ryu like in the moments before this, where we see him looking really kind of like calm and contemplative almost, but the screen shakes do suggest that what he's talking about is really deep internal turmoil. The shakes are really previewing what's about to be like this burst of fighting. And when Yuta says, "here it comes," immediately you get the fist just kind of bursting into frame before Yuta's even able to process it. So this "here it comes" really shows Yuta's kind of EQ almost factoring into the fight. He's able to sense when Ryu is actually getting fired up in this conversation and is about to launch his attack, even though Ryu's looking pretty neutral in that moment. An awesome pose for the beginning of their fight as well. Ryu kind of leaned back, exposing the muscles, the dog tags kind of like flying off his neck, looking down on Yuta. Their size difference ends up being such an important thing later in the fight, is something we'll talk about too. Yuta eating the impact with his hand, just barely able to make it up in time. Super cool. Now, when we talk about cityscape stuff, this is one of the things that I really want to hit on. So first, shoots a beam out of the window, uses the beam as physical cover to jump onto Yuta, and punches him down at this really sharp angle that ends up breaking through the floors of the building. The momentum generated, again, is something that we talked about in the other scene where he's flying across this space and then landing on top of Yuta really heavily with the hand, and then being able to visually see, okay, here's him breaking through a couple layers of the floor. Really why these cityscapes can be so important is it just gives such a concrete sense of the power, and when we see the glass shattering and stuff, we know the kind of damage that's being done by that punch. Even further emphasized when he does this beam here that wraps around the building and the whole thing kind of collapses on them. There's a really kind of like corny way to do their characters are blowing up buildings that doesn't quite work when they're just totally leveling cities and everything is getting crushed around them. On the one hand, yeah, the sense of power is still being communicated because, you're familiar with the city and what it would take to destroy it. And when there's destruction happening on a nuclear scale, yeah, you definitely get that feel that something incredibly powerful is happening. But there's also something really nice about the level of precision to Ryu's Granite Blast here, where the whole building doesn't collapse. He just cuts out part of the floor and then it kind of falls onto its support structure. So we see what is, just another like awesome shot here. We'll kind of clear out this dust just a little bit and just mark this up, but we can see where the damage has been done, right? The window's totally knocked out in the back here. Like he hasn't fully destroyed the floor, but he has to a certain extent, and in only like one whip around of the beam. So while it doesn't show such a massive scale, it's kind of feels equally impressive because the scale is so specific. Instead of giant destruction, we get contained destruction, but contained destruction that's very easy for us to process and conceptualize. This is another cool moment with the camera, where the camera is positioned kind of low to the ground, kind of like we're hiding behind this pile of rubble that's in the foreground. Let's give him the ditto as because he's rotoscoped. A lot has been made about the rotoscoping, especially since the Yuji and Hikari scene, but they just do such a great job of choosing what moments to use it. This is an awesome moment to have kind of very realistic human movement, because this shot is, I mean, it's far from flat. There's so much going on here. You know, again, this really dynamic foreground, this really interesting kind of like background space where we can see outside, and then the dust kind of moving across the frame. It's super dynamic, but it gets made even more dynamic by the super realistic motion. And while we're still being introduced to Ryu, it helps to see him move like a real person. And also it helps to see him move like a real person when there's a giant block of cement on his head. Like, that's a really tough thing to pull off. But combining the traditional animation with the rotoscoping in this way gives us a very unique sense of strength, where obviously the actor who's doing this and that they're tracing over doesn't have probably anything on their head, and they just kind of have to act out this motion a little bit. But in that way, it's like, since they're clearly not acting with anything on their head, they're moving their head very freely. And that gives like a very unique sense of ease in moving this giant ass piece of concrete, which is just another nice way of kind of showing scale, but also showing, you know, the hands in the pockets, the jacket's flowing. There's a casualness to Ryu, a chillness, a, if you will, nonchalance, which ends up making, you know, his character, I think, a fan favorite and just very cool in general. Now, this is one I really want to get into. Again, apologize for the fact that I'm probably going to have to do some black screening over what's about to happen, but okay. Yuta on the wire, launches, flies into the building, hits Ryu, right? They go into this exchange, flurry of hands moment there. Ryu throws him up, and then Yuta catches it on the comeback, grabs him by the neck. So now the momentum of the last shots, if you will, has gone. They're fighting head on. Just ignore this relation to the regular scene, but I'm just kind of drawing out a diagram. They're fighting head on, throwing punches at each other. Ryu grabs Yuta's hand and throws Yuta up. Then Yuta comes back down and lands behind Ryu. So our momentum is going in this direction, which is really important, because the next thing that happens is Ryu launches them back using his beam, slamming them into the wall, ultimately through the wall into the next building. But importantly, we see Yuta catches Ryu's waist and throws him into the building before Yuta himself makes contact. Then from here, Yuta rolls through the slam, grabs his ankle, and throws him out the window, and grabs this pole that got knocked loose on the way out. I'm going to play that back again, and hopefully we can play all of this. But yeah. They go back. Yuta clasps his hands at Ryu's waist, turns it into a suplex, rolls through that suplex and grabs his ankle, takes that ankle and throws him through the window, which breaks out this bar, which then Yuta grabs and is going to use as a weapon in the next scene. That's what I'm talking about when I mean they're keeping track of things and taking a momentum into account in a way that just feels so hyper realistic. Like, every detail is accounted for in an incredibly just like meticulous way. And these are the kinds of things that let us as fans see, you know, the step-by-step movement that we would be able to see in a real fight. Like, if you're watching UFC, you would be able to see the setup, the takedown, how it leads to a slam, how it leads to the ground and pound punches. And connecting all of those things and being able to understand why one move works versus why another move doesn't work is the quintessential act of understanding why one fighter is strong and another fighter is weak. And JJK gives us the tools to understand that very concretely, also with the power system, which I promise I'll talk about at some point. So we'll skip ahead a little bit here. We got the cool scene of Ryu shooting all like the little beams through the giant ball thing and then punching Yuta down onto the train tracks. Now, this scene is so awesome. So earlier in the episode, we see Uro just go out of her way to reveal her technique on her own. She doesn't necessarily have to do that, but we know technique reveals do something really interesting in Jujutsu Kaisen, right? Most anime don't have a reason why their characters explain their techniques. They just kind of do it because the audience needs to know it, and, you know, they have to explain it somehow. So characters will just kind of come out, monologue about their abilities, even if it would lead to them having maybe a disadvantage in a fight or just less of an advantage using their powers. The audience has to know one way or another, so the characters just come out and explain it. JJK, being annoyingly realistic about stuff, Gege felt like he needed to find a reason to incentivize his characters to do that. So he makes the binding vow rule that if you explain your curse technique to your opponent, for trading that information, your technique receives a fundamental boost in its basic power. That's really helpful for Uro because her attack, Thin Icebreaker, isn't incredibly powerful on its own. We see Yuta eat a couple of thin icebreakers and be relatively okay. So actually getting that power up boost is something that's particularly useful to her, but it also works for her character. We know that her whole complex is that she lived in the shadow of the great Fujiwara clan, and she was never given a name despite all of the great work she was doing. And so her goal in the Culling games is to make a name for herself, become known, become a great person who can look back at her life and say, I achieved something, I became someone. A big part of that is getting people to see her identity, to acknowledge her existence. And one of the most intimate things that somebody can know about you in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen is your curse technique. Uro doesn't just reveal her technique for the base power boost, she reveals it because she wants to be seen and known by the people around her, and having them see and know her curse technique is a part of them seeing and knowing her identity. That also probably goes into the whole hyper-feminine thing on some level, but I don't know. I don't know that much about feminism because I'm a boy. Let's get back to boy stuff. Curse technique explanation for Ryu, though, very different. He never explains his curse technique. Now, in a literal sense, this is probably because he doesn't have to, right? We see a lot of shows like Attack on Titan is a good example of this, where we don't ever get too much explanation about what each Titan's powers are because they're self-explanatory. The armored Titan has armor. You don't need to have a big explanation about that because you can just look at it and it makes sense for you. In Naruto, where there's a lot more complex powers, yeah, we need to take a couple seconds in monologue and figure out what everybody's doing. Uro's powers are really complex, so we need exposition. It just so happens that it works perfectly with her character. Ryu's technique is very simple to understand visually, so all you have to do is show the different ways it can possibly work. Now in the manga, all Ryu had was like the straight beam and then the split beam. His powers were a lot more limited than in the anime, where we see in this tunnel scene, he uses all different types of beams. In this scene, he starts with like the traditional beam, which Yuta breaks through using the pole that he grabbed earlier. Again, this whole scene in this like subway tunnel is totally added content, not in the manga originally. Yuta's able to break through that and swipe those out of the way. Ryu changes it up and starts with these more fine blasts. Again, not something he does in the manga, but he compresses the larger beam into a smaller burst of energy, which hits less total area, but the area that it does hit, it hits much harder. It requires more precision, but delivers a lot more force, so it breaks through Yuta's guard. So now Yuta has to switch strategies to dodging his way around this. And what does Ryu do? He totally goes in the opposite direction and fires a beam that's probably a lot weaker in general, but is giant, the size of the entire tunnel, and is really why he was trying to lure Yuta in the whole time. And that leads to his curse technique burning out, which makes his pompadour fall out. Again, not something that happens in the manga. An incredibly cool addition from the team at MAPPA to just expand Ryu's powers in such an interesting way, giving a condition for his curse technique burnout, making his curse technique work in ways that we never even saw it before. It's really just going above and beyond to elevate these characters and elevate this story in really meaningful ways. And yeah, I mean, in this way, we don't need to know anything more about Granite Blast than we already do. He can control the size of the beam, he can split it up, it can fire over long distances, he can make it really small and precise to make it more powerful. Basically, he can play with the conditions of his beam to get like different weapons in his arsenal, but at the end of the day, his power is outputting a bunch of cursed energy using his hair as the delivery method. We don't get really more than a line of dialogue ever about what his powers are, but we learn so much about the possibilities for them just through that one tunnel scene. It's an incredible teach tool. Sweet sequence here where Yuta gets shot out of the building and then caught by Uro, who again gives us a little bit of an explanation, which matters in this moment, but she's not really externalizing this part of it. It doesn't feel as unrealistic in the pacing of the fight dialogue because she's not really caught up in the moment of the fight. She's been kind of removed. So her having the space to think this out just again feels a little bit more realistic with the momentum of everything going on. It doesn't feel like we're taking a significant break in this kind of constant action between Ryu and Yuta because she's been kind of to the side and reintroduced. I also love that in this moment, she kind of is really a lot calmer than we see her in other shots when she's kind of lined up this perfect moment to strike Yuta super hard. It's kind of not what you would expect, but give me that expression. You can see it's less just pure rage from her here at this moment. Her tongue's out, her eyes are wide. she's looking at this like, I just fucking cooked. Like, this is the look of somebody who is thrilled with their work. This is like the kind of faces that like Michael Jordan was making when he was hooping. That's really, I think, the biggest sensation that I get from Jujutsu Kaisen fights, when you hear them thinking out all of these complex factors and lining up their perfect strategies to land the perfect hit on their opponent. There's not really a better word to describe the feeling than that the characters are cooking. And this is one of those moments where you can just look at her expression, see again the wide-eyed, the tongue out. She is looking at that hit on Yuta like, I just fucking cooked. I'm in my bag right now, is the vibe that this face gives me. A great expression work. Also, oh my god. I mean, another contender for my favorite shot in the show. Catching Ryu's beam, twisting it around like this. Again, taking care for momentum, like catching the angle that it's coming in at. We see here everything getting wrapped into her hands. It's kind of taking account of like the front of the beam, and then how it's getting like twirled around into, you know, this spot, and then it's getting relaunched back at Ryu over here. Again, just would have been easier to shortcut this in probably a lot of ways, but they really take everything into account very carefully. The distortions that her powers are causing on the landscape behind her is also so cool. We see like a very regular setup for the buildings over here, and then everything on the skyline on this side is totally warped and wavy. Super interesting. I'm doing the thing where I pause it every 2 seconds, but the choice for both of them also to go with two gendered insults. He says, you pile of vomit woman. And then she says, can it dick cheese? Which, first off, can it dick cheese? I mean, come on. This is the pinnacle of fight dialogue here, folks. That's an awesome thing to say to somebody while you throw a laser beam at them. But yeah, kind of keeping the like gender themes that are going on with both of them alive in the dialogue. They're actually kind of both acknowledging it. But also, again, another facial expression moment here where we do get a little bit more angularity here in the face that looks a little bit angrier, and, you know, yelling the insult feels a little bit angrier, but it still feels in this moment like, you know, wide-eyed, you know, kind of mouth hanging open a little bit here after that, smiling. She looks thrilled with her own work, which is just kind of a super cool vibe to have in a fight. Usually there's more kind of malice and, you know, frustration and, you know, heroicness are kind of the emotions that are coming to mind in a fight. Having somebody just be like purely excited and proud in this kind of way is a very different feel. It's very cool. Now, this is what I was talking about with the perspective stuff earlier. We can see that although as we're still rooting for Yuta all the time, it's very important that we kind of get put in opposition to Yuta sometimes. When we're in opposition to other characters, we're thinking about how powerful their abilities are. So, for example, in that shot earlier, when we're looking down at Kurorushi, we're thinking about, what is this thing about to do? What are the extent of its abilities? Is Yuta going to be able to handle this? Is this going to go and eat the people? We're worried about all of those things because we're looking down at it. It's like really the subject of the shot. It's the thing that we're supposed to be paying attention to primarily. And when the camera is placed in such a way that it sets us up next to, you know, Kurorushi's opponent, in that case Yuta, we're kind of thinking like we're on Yuta's team, which we are. But in this case, it kind of inverts that. We're still on Yuta's team, but now we're placed in the perspective of Uro, looking over Uro's shoulder down at Yuta. It's actually kind of a very similar shot in a way. You know, we're looking down. We've got a lot of levels going on here. I love, you know, the color distortion that's kind of happening all around her in these areas. But ultimately, we're getting a internal piece of little monologue here. You're resilient, thinking about how, you know, she thought she had killed Yuta, but it didn't work out. And now we're looking down at him. So we're in this position where we're actually set up alongside Yuta's opponent. We're in her perspective, getting her thoughts, and it makes us feel like, wow, yeah, Yuta is resilient. So we're thinking about him as kind of something that we're opposing. If we were in Yuta's perspective, we might be looking over his shoulder back up at Uro and thinking, wow, she hits hard. And we would be thinking about, oh my gosh, yeah, how terrible would it be to take, you know, a thin icebreaker? How many of these can, you know, Yuta take? That's the kind of things that you're thinking about when you're in Yuta's perspective. But when you're in Uro's perspective, you're thinking, oh my gosh, look at how much damage Yuta's capable of taking. Will she ever be able to slow him down? I don't know if I'm saying this too many times in a row, but we're still on Yuta's team. By putting us here, we're almost thinking like we're on Uro's. And, you know, since we're getting her internal monologue, we are literally reading out her battle plans and considering their efficacy on Yuta. I hope that made sense. I felt like I could have explained that better, but, you know, this video's got to get out eventually. Whatever. I'm going to do it again in 2 seconds, so bear with me as we go. See, we get another one here. Hope I'm able to kind of cut this together to make sense. I'm sorry if I kind of ended up jumping around a little bit. But again, we are over Ryu's shoulder, looking at Yuta, thinking about Yuta's abilities. We're finally seeing the bottom of your reserves. So, we all know that Yuta's curse energy is almost infinite, or it seems that way to the people who are fighting him. So Ryu's dialogue here really emphasizing the fact that, as he was fighting, he's thinking, oh my gosh, am I ever going to be able to get through this guy? He can just kind of constantly keep taking damage and healing up. And he's looking over and thinking, okay, yeah, from here, I'm going to be able to beat you. And again, by being over his shoulder, looking at Yuta, having Yuta being kind of the subject of focus in this shot, we end up kind of thinking like we're on Ryu's team. Like, oh yeah, Okotsu's running out of energy. Ryu will probably be able to beat him. Or like in the last shot, Uro will maybe be able to beat him now. And again, not to keep hammering home on this, but just the level of detail, one level in the foreground here, lower level stuff, something happening, maybe kind of like a train station situation under here. This elevated park surface, the detail of where Yuta crashed into this building and then came walking out to get here, the parking lot in the background, just every shot loaded with visual information, which makes everything so interesting to look at. And then an absolute peak reversal of both of those last two shots. We go back into Yuta's thoughts here. We can't see anybody else. We're kind of zooming in on his back, like we're getting closer into his mind. As he said, I wanted to gain more distance from everyone in the stadium. I wanted to get away before I did this. Like, I'm being backed into a corner here, but I have no option. Words do not, I can't even capture how peak this moment is. First off, another moment of Mappa like really loving and caring for JJK to just basically animate a manga panel. Like, this looks like a ninja artistic ninja animation. It's like ripped straight from the manga, straight from Gege style. So cool to have this be a moment where it's truly called back to the manga in such an earnest and faithful way. I also love something that really gets emphasized about Yuta's character design in moments where we're kind of set up in opposition to him is the darkness of his character. I mean, him and Rika's backstory is really freaky. And especially when Yuji and Naoya and Choso were fighting him at the beginning of the season, we get the sense that Yuta is just this really creepy, uncomfortable presence. And it's done super well in this panel, and I think why they preserved it, because first off, his face kind of covered up by his hand. Whenever a face is covered up like this, it almost implies some level of kind of deceit or trickery going on here, some kind of dishonesty. The darkness around his eyes, making him look really tired and worn down, while also having, the eyes themselves just kind of deadlocked onto us and the camera with a certain intensity to them. The shadows kind of at the top of his head, his hair fading into the darkness, the shadows under his chin. Yuta just kind of has this very dark, concerning, unsettling aura. He's got a very horror movie aura about him where, Ryu's got this kind of energetic, fun thing going on, and Uro's got this really intense expressiveness to her. Yuta has, the certain pathos that we see at the beginning of the episode, taking care of the kids. On the other side of that, he's got, the dark, twisted, love, monstrous, I can't think of a better way to put it, the horror elements behind him that, while he's the good guy, a shot like this does a great job of emphasizing that good in this universe is far from light and happy all the time. Now, this shot also really cool. Just want to note, because this one's directly from Uro's perspective, you can see how it matches up with the other shots. This is literally her exact POV on the moment where Rika emerges. And we know that also double confirmed for a fact, because she said, his Shikigami is completely manifested. That's her thought. So we get confirmed her perspective. Again, emphasizing this point that when we're in her perspective, we're imagining ourselves opposing Yuta, because we're, with her thoughts, we're looking at Yuta. And it's one of these moments where we're really supposed to imagine how terrifying it would be to go up against him. I mean, Rika is looking so scary, so freaky here. Just kind of the gross worm body going into darkness, the giant boulder shoulders and jacked arms, and this creepy eyeless face. Yuta actually matching the eyeless face. We can only see just these dark spots under his eyes and the dark spots created by his hair. He's looking supremely creepy, almost zombie-ish, maybe vampiric in this moment. I think that's also why he's got the high collar. It's a little Count Dracula going on there. That's not really a hard theory, but it just kind of feels like that. Him and Rika also kind of in matching color schemes, like her tail thing black, pants black, body white, shirt white. They've got this weird kind of synchronization between him and the monster that when you're Uro looking at this, you can imagine being absolutely terrified by the unknowingness of what Rika is about to do. And that's actually something that we're also experiencing as the audience. I'll talk about again in a minute, but our understanding of Yuta's powers at this point in time are extremely limited. It hasn't been formally explained a whole ton. This new version of Rika after JJK 0 has only gotten a little bit of an explanation up to this point, and they'll explain it in a second, but we actually don't know that Yuta's technique is copy for sure until it comes up later, and we don't know at all what the conditions for fulfilling it are. Normally, that's something that you would expect to know about a main character, especially if you're trying to root for them and be in their shoes. Again, we're talking about all the technical aspects of imagining a fight and getting into the perspectives and imagining opposing the bad guys in these scenes, but that's kind of impossible to think through if you don't know the character that you're rooting for, if you don't know all the information about them. Right now in this moment, there's actually more mystery around Yuta than about Ryu or Uro, so there's kind of a certain distance between us and Yuta that wouldn't be present in a fight. Like, you never feel like this about Megami or Yuji when you're watching them fight, but there is kind of this certain implied distance between us and Yuta that adds to that kind of creepy, unsettling, almost the uncanny valley main character of JJK, where he's so close to being a very traditional kind of kind, caring anime MC, like you might think of comparing him to Tanjiro, but there's always kind of this darkness looming in the background with him, on the one hand created by Rika, who is this incredibly terrifying dark force that he's connected with. I mean, really the only character that has like control over a cursed spirit like this besides Geto, who, he's got his shit going on. And then also his persona, which on the one hand seems to be so kind and friendly, but then when he gets into a fight like this, proves to consistently be very dark and a lot of his tactics very underhanded. Yuta is a very complex and interesting character to encounter as somebody that we're supposed to be rooting for. It's just very non-traditionally presented. Gross. So yeah, the explanation for this ends up being that like the Rika that we see now isn't actually like a traditional Shikigami or anything like that. She is just kind of like a ball of cursed energy that exists outside of him that he's able to summon from time to time when he puts on the ring. He has 5 minutes connected to this external cursed energy source, which is preserved through the fact that part of Rika's soul is like eternally connected to him in her promise to marry him in the ring. So even though most of her soul kind of moves on to the afterlife, we see that she's still got this like eternal connection to Yuta through the item of the ring. And that's how he's able to access this massive like well of cursed energy that exists kind of from him, but that is external to him. And so, I mean, yeah, when we're talking about the deceit, the underhanded tactics, this is exactly what we're meaning here. We see Uro's look of shock as Rika kind of clears and Yuta pulls out the cursed speech, something that we're not even definitely sure he's going to still be capable of doing. Because again, we never really get a full explanation of what his cursed technique is in JJK 0. Now, I believe the explanation for that is that copying cursed techniques was just supposed to be something that jujutsu sorcerers who are really skilled are capable of doing. JJK 0, if you don't know, came out before the rest of the main series. So Yuta was initially like the main character of the series. It was just supposed to be JJK 0 and it was going to be done, but then people loved it. So Gege made real JJK, and curse energy and stuff worked differently back then. Domain expansions hadn't even been made yet. So Yuta's technique being copy was just a feature of him being a really powerful sorcerer. So, it never really gets fully explained. We don't know exactly how it works, but him busting this out here is just kind of like a crazy moment that we're not seeing coming. And then, I mean, what an incredible way to animate it, using the calligraphy as a way to show the power of the words. This sequence, again, all added from this point. Everything that happens in the parking lot here, not originally in the manga. So, like, Uro whipping up the ground like this, and, the two fights that they break into here, all added content. It's just ridiculous considering the fact that, let me find a cooler looking screenshot. This is just, it's ridiculous considering the fact that the average, I did the math on this, the average like number of manga chapters adapted per episode for, I think, season 1 and season 2, it fell around 2.5 chapters adapted per episode. Now the pacing of season 3 has jumped up even more. JJK already had breakneck pacing. In 2.5 chapters of JJK, a lot of stuff happens, and 2.5 is even slightly higher than most other similar manga. I think Attack on Titan lands at like 1.7 or something like that. I know I did the math for Haikyuu, and it lands right around 2.5. Naruto lands around 2 or something like that. So JJK is already a really fast-paced anime. I mean, season 2 was incredibly fast-paced. Season 3 has jumped up to 3.3 chapters per episode. But this episode, Sendak Colony, the reason why people didn't think that this was all going to get made and that it was going to be too squished is because it's adapting 7 chapters. I mean, that's almost triple the amount that they're usually doing in an average episode in season 1 or 2. And somehow they're still finding all this space to add content. It's ridiculous. I can't even imagine how they pulled this off and how they compressed time. And looking back at the manga and comparing it to the episode, they didn't take out much. They took out a little bit of exposition before Yuta versus Kurorushi and a little bit of dialogue for Ryu and Uro, but I don't feel like if you watch the anime, you're missing anything that was in the manga. But I feel like if you read the manga, you're missing a lot of stuff that happened in the anime. They adapted so much and added so much at the same time, which just should not be possible. Next awesome moment that we got to do here is, of course, this sequence. They start throwing hands, dodges a beam, Uro catches it and throws it back. But that idea of looping the cursed energy around herself and throwing it back at him is going to come up in a minute. Then this also added content. This never happens in the manga. Her using the air to have Rika hit Yuta. That's totally new and such a creative way for her to use her technique. Another just really nice cityscape shot here. I know I can't get over it, but all of the buildings in the background, the destruction, while leading into their next piece of the fight. That, the looping thing that Uro just did immediately leads into Ryu doing this, looping his beam around himself and using it as the beam barrier. I feel like I'm going to say it every 2 seconds now, but original content for the anime. Charging in here, something that I didn't notice originally about this scene is that Yuta weaves in between the beginning and the end of the beam to step into the barrier. I didn't realize that the first couple times I watched it, but then I caught it one time and I was like, that's actually a sick detail. Him doing the little side step in. And this is, another just great line of very simple dialogue that's kind of communicating a lot about what's been going on in the fight. Is, wanna go is the thing that you say to initiate a fight. So to say that halfway through a fight is obviously implying some kind of change. In this case, obviously being, we're going to get close quarters and we're going to throw hands. Now that's funny because clearly Yuta's been trying to close the gap between the two of them for this entire time because Ryu's really dangerous at range. But the whole time, Yuta's also been, using the pole and using different spots, ducking through the buildings and stuff to find ways to hide from taking the beam on directly. So while he has been trying to close the distance, he's been trying to close the distance concealed. And now he's just coming straight on at Ryu, closing himself into this small space. And this also works because even though Ryu is traditionally a long-range fighter, he's so much bigger and more jacked than Yuta that we kind of feel the sense that he's going to be more powerful at close range, despite that not being the thing that his whole kit is built for. I mean, look at him in this. His shoulders broad, big muscles. And when Yuta comes in close here, we can see he's like half Ryu's size. So this choice to go just straight hand-to-hand head-on is actually sacrificing a lot of options for both of them. But it's something that both of them make in this moment is a judgment of that it's their best move for advancing this fight. It's really interesting. It kind of compromises both of their strategies, but also enters some new possibilities. That transition, we must talk about that transition. Editing is the most underrated part of filmmaking, and how you cut between shots is incredibly important. Here, we get a combination of a couple of different techniques. So we see Yuta and Ryu really close up throwing some punches. Then what this technique is called is racking focus. I think is like technically, I don't know if there's a different animation term for it. It's what it is in film. But it's, where you change the focus of the camera to focus on something farther in the distance or closer up to shift between points of emphasis of what's happening in a scene. So go back again. I actually just realized that I can slow this down. So we're going to watch this on half speed, throwing their punches here. And as you can see it already kind of slowly start, the background becomes a little bit clearer. It's almost totally dark as they're throwing the punches. And then they start fading out here and the background starts fading in. You can really see it clearly happen when it's the slowed down. I'm glad that I just discovered that feature in that moment. And then we see, the building getting destroyed where Uro and Rika were just fighting. And then we get this really nice cut where we've gone totally away from the fight. We're watching these big dust clouds bloom up on the side of the building. And that's kind of our visual focus. And then to cut into this next scene where it's going to be Rika versus Uro up in the sky here, we actually come out of a big dust cloud and the shot is moving on this, and you can see all the lines moving on this same diagonal. So like to draw this out, I'm loving this new app that I have. So I have to draw everything. To draw this out, they're moving across the building in this direction in these big clouds of dust on these lines. And so when we're cutting to the next scene, it's going to be really visually jarring if all of a sudden we're moving and, you know, say like straight down or something. It's a total shift in momentum. And that's something that we've talked about a lot throughout this episode, the way that momentum is carrying between the actions of the characters and how that's making their moves feel, you know, more or less realistic. When we get, well, you know, I'll keep these lines on screen so we can see how the cut works. When we get it, this big cloud of dust is following on that same line. So as our eyes are kind of tracking across the screen, following them in this direction, all of a sudden we cut and they're still moving in this direction. So it creates a really nice continuity between the two shots that serves to connect both, you know, Rika and Uro from that far away angle, but also to easily transition us up and out of the fight between Ryu and Yuta and into this next sequence. Okay, again, apologize if this sounds different. This is the next day. But yeah, then the next thing we get is the Sun, Moon, and Star Squad. We already talked about that a lot at the beginning. Lived in the darkness, selfless devotion. They were forbidden for having names. Stuff that we kind of covered, but generally, again, the idea being that these are people who are working for the clans, but they're not receiving any agency in their lives or any identity. They're doing the work of upholding the clan's power, but not receiving any of the glory or the reward. So, you know, working class creating power for the upper class and not receiving anything in return for that. And then there's this, which is really interesting detail. That man once granted me a name so he could execute me instead for his crime of slaying his own kin. So this is a Fujiwara clan member who's killed another Fujiwara clan member, and he's blaming it on Uro, and she's kind of getting set up to sacrifice herself. So I think she actually did get executed, died, got brought back through the reincarnation technique that we see in season 2, and then got turned into a cursed object to get brought back and reincarnated in the Culling Games by Kenjaku. Also really interesting here that Ryu, like once or twice, says it's a lover's quarrel, were you guys flirting, to Yuta kind of teasing him with him and Uro. But I think the implication here is that that man, Yuta's connection to the Fujiwara clan, and the fact that Ryu is kind of mentioning the lover's quarrel thing is all meant to kind of set us up in this mindset that Uro really was like, this came out of a lover's quarrel. Maybe the member of the clan that is the, you know, that man in this situation is somebody that she was in love with, somebody that she cared about very deeply. Maybe there were some kind of romantic feelings going on here. So this is a betrayal that goes maybe even beyond just the exploitation by this really powerful clan. It actually becomes like a little bit more personal. Another great dialogue choice here. Are you that afraid of me? Afraid of me becoming my own person? So she says, so yeah, another great dialogue choice there. It's always you, Fujiwara, getting in my way. Are you that afraid of me? Afraid of me becoming my own person. Her stance here really open. She's smiling, again, wide-eyed, staring Yuta in the face fearlessly. Here, I see maybe a little bit more of where the feminist commentary is coming in with Uro. A big thing during the Heian period was that actually upper-class women did have like a lot more agency compared to in other societies around the world at this time. They got to make art and they got to participate somewhat in government, but a lot of times the things that they were doing were being attributed to their husbands or men. You know, if they're writing something or doing a painting, a lot of times it will be a wife who's publishing this painting in her husband's name as his work to make sure it gets out into the world. And then, of course, again, the thing about how, you know, rich emperors will claim that they built some great megastructure and not acknowledge the contributions of the millions of working class people who actually went and built the thing with their hands. You know, the emperor collects all the money from those people, reinvests it into building this giant city or something like that, and then makes those people go work and do it. And while the great emperor historically gets the acclaim, millions of working class people go nameless for actually doing the thing that made that empire so great. So there's a little bit of both of these things happening here. Uro breaking free of specifically this man that she might have been in love with who was holding her back and using her as a tool, and then also the societal dynamics of her being a poor person getting used as a tool by the ultra wealthy. And in this moment, she's feeling like, I'm breaking free. I'm finally able to kind of stake my claim on this world around me. I'm stamping my name on history. And it's kind of one of those moments where I think what's happening in her head is, now the whole world is going to know that it wasn't really this Fujiwara clan that was so great. It was me in the shadows making it great. They were frauds all along, and I was the one who was bringing the greatness to this clan. There's some level of that dynamic going on. It's like by her succeeding in these Culling Games and particularly, of course, winning this fight against Yuta. She's rejecting the being hidden and is stepping out into the world to show herself these people weren't so great after all. It was all me all along. And that somebody in the Fujiwara clan would be scared of the outside world being able to finally see that from her. Another thing here that took me a minute to figure out was how Drew's domain thing works. So apparently Yuta ate some part of Drew's body in that opening scene, and we now see him using like these mini Shikigami that he've created that are like kind of Rika, but are also, themed after, I think they're pterosaurs that are in the background when we see Drew's domain. Drew has like the two big gophers and then all of the pterosaurs that fly around within them. So the idea is that wherever these Shikigami are moving becomes these kind of like, we see them outlined in pink here, these like slicing barriers that when you cross through these lines, you get cut up by them. So the reason nobody was really doing anything in Sendai originally, why there was this four-way deadlock, was because Drew had established this massive domain. And if you wanted to go kill him, you would have to go enter that domain. Unless, of course, you're Ryu, who could shoot him from long range. But if Ryu shot Drew from long range, then that would open up Uro to attack Ryu. And obviously, Ryu's matchup versus Uro is absolutely terrible. And Uro kind of has to lay low because she has a bad matchup versus Drew, but also a particularly bad matchup versus Kururushi, who can overwhelm her. So that's why they get kind of caught into this deadlock. But yeah, Drew's technique coming out here, which apparently Yuta had prepared ahead of time. And we can see these kind of Shikigami tracing the lines that let Yuta land this next attack. And so, yeah, again, some really awesome character stuff happening here. Yuta being like, it's not worth it to kill other people for your own personal ambition, while Uro's kind of standing on the other side of the situation, being like, it's your people, the people that you're descended from, the people that have blessed you with your great talent for jujutsu, who give you the power to say that. And it's only because they spent so long being so selfish and hurting so many people to gain that power that they can then look down on people like me who are just trying to do, essentially the same thing that they did to get to this pinnacle of the jujutsu world. And they can say, oh, it's disgusting for you to be willing to hurt and exploit other people when, the only reason they don't have to do that as much anymore is because they already have done that, and now they already have the power and the privilege that they've gained from it. Also, just another super cool shot here. I don't think too much to break down technically, but like Uro kind of in focus close up, and then these two a little bit faded in the background. Awesome. The momentum created by this, carrying over into the angle that she's kind of looking at Yuta from in the next shot. Another really interesting, cool editing moment there. Peak is about to happen. Now, something I'm interested by is I don't know for sure why Ryu drums on his chest like this before opening his domain. In my mind, this is kind of him calling them to attention. It's him being like, everybody pause. Let's go all out right now. Like, let's go for it. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I'm interested to hear people's opinions on that. Okay, yeah, and I'm going to see how much of that I can play and keep in the video for having this moment, but obviously we're going to go into depth on this. First off, the building falling creates such an awesome momentum to this shot. In the following wide here, the fact that we kind of get this sense of like, I don't know, almost anti-gravity as these stones float into the air. It gives that sensation that something kind of mystical and powerful and earth-shaking is about to happen. Then the choice to go with this shot to represent it, where we are in like kind of a equidistant from each other. It doesn't look equidistant in this because we're at the where the camera is placed right now, but as it rotates, we'll see these people are all equally spaced from each other, all kind of in this like triangle of just kind of looking at each other in this moment, trying to figure out what the next move is going to be, if they're all actually about to do it. Again, similar to the Yuta and Kururushi shot where they're both at an angle earlier, the camera placed really low to the ground. Like, again, we can imagine we're almost on the floor looking up at these people, making them look really large and powerful compared. We're also, again, in Yuta's perspective, behind him, over his shoulder, looking out at the other two. This is the ultimate moment of stakes in this fight. So even though like for the whole last sequence, we were kind of in Uro's head, getting her thoughts and her perspective on fighting Yuta and her figuring out his technique as they go, now we kind of come back to Yuta for the climax. Yeah, maybe this would have been the better one to actually do. But again, we can really see it looks a lot more equidistant in this shot. We're going to continue rotating and get even closer to Ryu straight behind Yuta's back this time. So normally the thing about the over the shoulder shot that works really well, you could kind of see it in the difference between the last shot and this one, is it gives a sense of directionality, right? When Yuta was open faced a little bit more towards Uro's side, you kind of get the sensation that he's almost looking off in this direction and interacting with her on some level. But now when he's totally squared to these two, it gives this really sense of kind of even focus. It gives that sense of even focus between the two characters. Like everybody is at a very equal moment. And also seeing the hand signs pop up before we actually get the 3 close-up shot, I think was an awesome choice, because we get to see them make the hand signs in both. So it's not like we miss that moment, but here it kind of like pre-fires what's about to happen. We recognize what they're doing. We kind of feel it coming, and then they throw the hands up, and then we're like, oh, this is domain expansion. And then we actually get the emphasis on it in the next scene. Something I want to talk about too here just briefly is the fact that between these 2 last shots, we go inside the building for a second there where it's gray. The lights are off. We're looking at cement. It's gray. It's gray on the side of the building. There's all this dust floating up. The building itself is collapsing. And then here, what happens in this shot with color is it starts off, the blue and purple sky that we've seen for the rest of the episode, and then gets kind of darker as the camera turns. Scratch the hand sign thing. Yeah, we can see it. It's, nice light color, purple, blue. Then the hand signs pop up one by one. I mean, looking really awesome. I would love to break these down. The heart here for Ryu. I mean, there's probably so much you could do with the Uro crossed arms and the heart here, but we just don't have time today, unfortunately, because this is already going so long. I have no idea. The domain expansion hand symbolism is kind of beyond me. That's a lot of Buddhism stuff that I don't understand, but super interesting. The fact that they each get a color in this scene that they're going to be associated with: green, blue, red, or this is more like purple, pink, whatever, but and then when we come back to this next scene, again, we were talking about the perspective, but now the whole background is like totally blacked out. So it's just these 3 glowing, really giving that sense that they are all like the most important things that are happening in the world right now are these 3 people. And really interesting to have them not even be that physically large. We've got all of these big rocks floating up in the foreground, all these giant buildings in the background, and the total emphasis of this scene is just on these 3 people. It really feels like nothing else in the world matters than these 3 and what they're about to do. Beautiful editing work there, again, to cut from each of them putting up their hand signs again to then Yuta putting up his hand signs, and to work that into this like triple panel. Again, totally drawn up exactly like the manga, giving a lot of kind of credit to Gege's art style. It's also one of those ones where it feels like there's been such a cultural moment in the US around people reading the manga and talking about the things that happen in it. And there's no way that Mappa doesn't have some kind of sense of that's what's going on. It's probably a lot more common for people to read ahead of the anime over in Japan, where like manga is just a bigger part of the culture. But the fact that that's happened, almost like a significant portion of the fandom has read the manga for JJK, more significant than any other fandom I've ever been a part of. So it feels like paying homage to the manga here is like really especially effective and really especially important, kind of almost having a dialogue in a way with the real world, with just how popular this show is and how much people love it. And of course, the close-ups here are absolutely beautiful. Close-ups are something that we're kind of we get sparingly throughout this episode. We're getting a lot more big sweeping shots of the battlefield and stuff like that, but getting in really close to each of their faces and getting the really strong sense of emotion. Yuta kind of with this, slack mouth, eyes kind of relaxed again, and this is very what's going on with his ear? Ugh. This, the really creepy disposition that they're trying to have him keep. We can see it with the lighting on this side of his face being like totally shaded in over here and up here, giving this perception of like there's half of his face in shadow, half of his face in light. This is a really common film technique for when you're trying to represent somebody going through a moment of decision, or of trying to show that there's some good and some evil present in somebody, that there's kind of 2 options. You light one half of their face one way, the other half another way. We can see these 2 are in much more flat lighting comparatively, despite Ryu actually, being standing on a pretty sharp angle too, like Yuta is. I mean, she's straight on, so it'd be kind of weird to have her face lighted 2 differently in this moment, but Ryu's at an angle, Yuta's also at an angle, but Yuta gets this much darker emphasis on this side of his face. Again, giving that impression that there is some darkness contained within, Yuta's general light. The ring here, front and center, it works really well with his domain expansion hand sign that this ends up coming up into the close-up frame. It's really cool. But yeah, it's almost like he looks kind of almost sad to be doing this in this moment, which is just very, a very different kind of intensity than the other 2 are presenting, but The eyes are just in dead focus, just slightly droopy. It's like, I don't want to have to do this to you right now, almost face, which is, I think, very interesting. Then we get Ryu. I mean, just like the picture of kind of excitement, and we'll talk about this in another shot with him too that's going to come up in a second, but there is the presence of joy. You know, he looks like he's screaming out, not necessarily in rage, not necessarily in elation, but in something kind of in between. It's that classic kind of anime, like, I love violence thing, but in a much more lighthearted way than is typical for the I like violence character. I feel like when you think of that, you think of Hisoka and some others like that who really lean into that persona of getting like a lot of their pleasure in their life out of fighting. Ryu takes that and puts it in a much more kind of like fun direction. He's not like this dark, brooding, deeply evil person. Even Sukuna, I guess, is a good example of this too, where Sukuna is all about fighting, and that's like the whole purpose of his life, but in a much more like fucked up kind of dark, disturbing way. Whereas Ryu is just in it because he truly enjoys being able to express himself. And that's kind of the sensation that we get from him here. It's not like this sick, twisted love of violence because like Sukuna lets him kind of impress his power onto the world, or like Hisoka, he's getting some weird like whatever out of it. It's here, he's enjoying this because he's getting to fully cut loose and really be himself. And so the, you know, open mouth screaming, eyebrows kind of raised here, he's just enjoying that he gets to really be in this moment with these two people and be letting it all out. And then Uro on the other side, this is what we're talking about when we mean rage throughout the rest of this episode. You know, the deep slant to her really, really extreme eyebrows here, scrunched up in the forehead. That's another, you know, a nice detail, I guess, to point out about Yuta, as we see like a little bit of the scrunch in the brow here, this big scrunch right in the middle. Yuta like totally relaxed through here. He just seems so much more calm than the other two. Then her mouth hanging open, but at these like really kind of sharp angles, her chin coming to a really kind of sharp spot here. The eyes, her eyes are so cool. The like little, almost looks like a little like atom or galaxy thing going on in the middle of them, glowing at us. We see that like for Yuta, this is kind of a regrettable circumstance that he has to deal with these people this way. But, you know, if he's here, he's going to go all out and he's totally into it, relaxed, calm, focused. Ryu absolutely loving this moment. And on the other hand, we have Uro who's screaming out against something very deep that this interaction is kind of triggering with her, within her, like a certain, you know, rage that the other two aren't experiencing. There is a hate that the other two aren't experiencing. And you can really feel that this is something that she's brought into her fight, into this fight from the outside, which we get through the lore, but we also kind of get through the difference in all of their expressions. And then the choice to go like totally dark in this area in here, like dark around her neck and stuff, is really cool because this kind of feels like maybe the most internal space that she has. It's contained by her arms and then kind of outlined by her head. And the fact that like her, you know, maybe neck, her heart in this area is all blacked out is again kind of lending itself to that picture of the really intense kind of emotional baggage that she's bringing into this fight and into this moment where she's finally able to, it seems like, fully express herself in the way she's been meaning to for such a long time. So I guess, you know, what I'm kind of coming to through this analysis is that self-expression ends up being kind of the big thing that Uro and Ryu have in common. But yes, domain expansion, electric, getting the three eyes here that are actually kind of electric here, getting the three eyes all seeming like they've got these like fuzzy line things, like they're little explosions happening. You've got sense of the outward momentum of like the deep internal stuff that comes out with the domain expansion. I don't know how much this has been formalized to this point in the anime, how much of the conversation about this has been had up to this point in the anime, but domain expansion is the expression of domain expansion is the externalization of your innate domain, and your innate domain really seems to be like your soul, your body, and your curse technique all kind of have this one space inside of your body. We see Sukuna's innate domain a lot. This is kind of the place where your psyche exists within yourself. And when you do a domain expansion, you take your psyche and kind of throw it onto the world. And when somebody gets caught inside of that, obviously, then it's like they're kind of caught inside of you. I kind of want to compare this to the scene in Gravity Falls where they're fighting Bill for the first time and they're in Stan's brain. And so since they're in like a mindscape, whatever they dream up can just kind of like pop up and they can use it to fight Bill. That's kind of what domain expansion seems like to me. It's like you're going into somebody's dreamscape, and then their curse technique, this ability that's been impressed on them since birth that is deeply tied to their psyche, something that we'll get into definitely later on, probably not in season 4, but when we get more details, like way farther down the line, as some of the big fights that you might have heard about. I try to do these videos, no manga spoilers, so whatever, but you've probably heard about the big fight. We'll talk about how curse techniques work and how they form and what they have to do with our identity when we get to that. Talking about it right now too much would be a little spoilery. But yeah, domain expansion is such, like, in this world, a powerful thing, but also a personal thing. So getting really up close and personal in this way and seeing it feel like it's bursting out of their eyes, which, there's the classic, like, eyes are the window to the soul. The connection between the identity and the attack is so strong by doing the shot like this. I also want to just talk about a little bit about domain expansion and why it works so well. I think it's truly one of the best power system things to happen in an anime, maybe ever. It's incredible. It's so well designed. So as we know, domain expansions create a barrier. Within that barrier, somebody's curse technique is guaranteed to hit or is guaranteed to operate in some kind of way. So there's Gojo's Infinite Void, where if you get caught in it, he fries your brain. And there's Hikaruma's Deadly Sentencing, where if you get caught in it, you can't do any violent acts and you have to participate in the trial, which will then give him an advantage outside of the domain. Domain expansion feels so hype because from the moment we're introduced to it early in the series, we see Sukuna use it and kill the finger curse super easily. We see Gojo use it and kill Jogo, or not kill, but whatever, beat Jogo super easily. We see Mahito use it and almost kill Nanami, but then Yuji breaks in, and then we see ultimately how much energy it cost Mahito. He's barely able to use his curse technique after this, and he has to run away, and he barely survives fighting Nanami and Yuji because he uses his domain at the wrong moment, and, Sukuna does the soul damage to him and whatever. We see throughout season 1, basically, that it can provide so much reward, and it also provides so much risk. So we see, the benefits and the minuses to it. And then in season 2, we see a lot of people countering domain expansion. So in Hidden Inventory, it doesn't come up, but then in the Shibuya incident, we see the whole fight that happens inside of Dagon's domain and how, Falling Blossom emotion is used. We see Simple Domain with Mahito versus Mekamaru. We see a domain clash with Megami and Dagon in that domain. And so we get a lot of the technical mechanics of how it works, the way that you can neutralize the sure hit condition. And Mei and Wee Wee is another good example of this. So we see that domain expansions are these super powerful ultimate attacks in season 1, and they're essentially fight winners if you can land them. But if you miss, they can end up being the thing that loses you a fight. In season 2, we see that there's multiple different ways to counter domains, and they become these really interesting spaces that are like not always instant win conditions, but are kind of like new battlefields for these really, really technical clashes of abilities that have a lot of different considerations that you're kind of going through moment to moment to figure out who's going to come up on top. Because ultimately, if somebody uses their domain expansion, we know it's either going to win them the fight or lose them the fight in a lot of ways. Now in season 3, we've seen a domain expansion be used in a totally new way where it just provides another kind of advantage that's not necessarily like a sure hit condition. It's just placing another rule set onto how a fight is going to work moving forward. So domain expansion, first off, shows so much personality from each person and how they all work differently. It also expresses a lot of skill in which sorcerers can use it and which sorcerers are able to counter it. And so by the time we're at this point in season 3, we've seen domain expansion win a bunch of fights. We've seen it lose a bunch of fights. We've seen it change the dynamic of a bunch of fights. We've seen the countermeasures to it, how you can break free, how you can manage to fight within it, how you can turn it against the person who's using it. And all of these things end up culminating in this moment where we see 3 of the most powerful characters we've been introduced to in this entire series. Genuinely, among the second tier of strength behind, at this point, really only Gojo and Sukuna. And we get this overwhelming sensation as they all call out domain expansion. Also, nice subtitle detail that I just noticed, exclamation point, period, calm, excitement. But yeah, as they all call out domain expansion in this moment, we get the overwhelming sense that this epic sweeping fight is about to be decided in the next action. Because domain expansion has such a clear rule set, it's had such clear impacts on different fights throughout the story. It's been a part of so many climactic moments up to this point. Just hearing these 2 words, I mean, genuinely, I knew it was coming. I read the manga. It had me out of my seat watching this episode. Domain expansion is an absolute masterclass in power system craft. And again, it goes back to the way that we're able to engage with these things. Since JJK has clear rule sets, if you want to fight domain expansion, you need a simple domain or Falling Blossom Emotion or a domain of your own. If you don't, you get hit by this attack and there's nothing you can do about it. If you clash domains and the other person's domain is better refined than yours, then your domain will collapse. Since we have all of these rules present, we as the viewers can mentally engage every time a domain is open. Oh, what techniques do they have to counter this? What abilities can they use to cancel out the sure hit? And, is there a way for them to escape? Will deploying their own domain help? All of these things are kind of happening in our minds when we are in a domain expansion and we see domain expansion happening because we can understand it and thus we can kind of participate in it. And so on a whole other level, seeing domain expansion not only wraps us into a climactic moment, but it wraps us into a thought process about who is going to win. We know how a domain clash works. We know it's coming down to this moment, and we're able to really think it through. Who is going to win? Because we understand what's happening and why. Soundtrack also just as good as it gets. Just briefly to mention, I love Ryu's expression here. Eyebrow furrowed like he's angry, kind of putting on the intensity, but eye wide open and pupil super small, almost looking scared. So there's kind of this contrast between like the two sides of, excitement it can be either elation and joy for something that's about to come or fear for something that's about to come. Those are kind of the two emotions that really craft excitement, and you can feel both of them going on here. There's a little bit of fear, there's a little bit of the, intense focus and anger, the excitement that he's brought throughout this episode, and the fact that he kind of called them out to do this clash in the first place. Really nice, subtle character moment, and Kurorushi ruins it. Lame. But yeah, I mean, is this the coolest story choice that could have been made? Maybe not. I would have liked to see what a triple domain clash looks like. I don't know. I'll always kind of be bummed that we didn't get to see this, but I understand why. It's kind of actually impossible to imagine how this would work within the established rule set of domain expansion. Is it whose domain out of the three would have been the most refined? I guess probably. Would all of their sure hits have just kind of canceled out and they would have just been fighting in the domain? I don't know. Interesting to think about, though. But whatever, Kurorushi's back, parthenogenesis, just asexual reproduction, so it made a second copy of itself before it got killed, so it's back. I like the taste of iron is back, and I love that, and everything falls through. Another great shot here, though. I mean, come on. Again, with the equidistant space over, I'll just draw it up a little bit, but again, equidistant space in Yuta's perspective, looking over his shoulders at everybody here. We can kind of feel the spacing between everybody, even all looking at each other, kind of all in similar poses. Ryu, like holding onto his coat here, is just kind of so tough. The other one's falling with their arms at their sides, just kind of taking stock of their opponents and what's about to happen next. Super duper cool. And okay, we'll try and really speed it up here going to the end. Kurorushi's alive. Yuta just absolutely dunks on Uro, who Kurorushi jumps on immediately. We know she's been concerned about him the whole episode, and he's the reason she wasn't coming out. Her technique fails because, again, domain expansion. Peak. Once you use domain expansion, your curse technique burns out. That's such a nice detail. It's a real, risk reward to using domain expansion that we can feel as the audience. And, again, we get another moment of this kind of Kurorushi enveloping a lot of the screen, pouncing. And so, yeah, we get this, that the domain expansion risk condition has actually been fulfilled. Nom, 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 nom. Poor Uro. She gets dunked on so badly in this scene. She gets absolutely teed up. They get digged by the granite blast. Another cool detail, Ryu not really experiencing the risk condition of domain expansion as much because his technique is ultimately just cursed energy output, and domain expansion fries your usage of your technique, not necessarily your cursed energy output. So it's like he's kind of unaffected by this. It's nice. Yuta decides to not make out with a cockroach to kill it this time. Ugh, so peak. The two mirroring shots of them both kind of extending their arms here are, really nice. Ryu's frame, he's standing on the right, and there's this little bit of the open, this frame. Ryu's is the inversion, but in this frame we get all of this negative space in the front that's kind of hinting at, visually that there's something happening off frame that we're supposed to be caring about, and the opposite happening with Ryu as they both take these poses. Just good filmmaking. Also really cool that Yuta's chest isn't open to us like Ryu's is. He's kind of closed off towards Rika, so nice detail. I love this too, his expression kind of softening in this moment as he's realizing what's going on in Ryu's head. The choice to go to the calligraphy again in the middle of the scene, I think it's just so cool. They do this multiple times in this episode, and it kind of just immediately takes you out of the headspace of the battle and kind of puts you into thinking about just the language. which is hard to do when you've got all of these crazy visual effects going on. But when you focus on just the language, you end up focusing on what that language is trying to communicate. It's like, I think for a lot of people, when you're reading a book, you're paying more attention to what's being said than when you're watching a show, because, the book, the words are the only thing going on. That kind of puts you into the bookish mindset, so that when you see this next frame, you're thinking again after a moment of pause and after a moment of just being with language about what's going on with this person here in front of you in a little bit more of an intense way than you would be normally when you're more concerned with visuals, which is why it works so well to do it with Uro and having her little, exposition about her past done in those 2 panels that are just writing before she talks about, you Fujiwara, you don't get to tell me to not be selfish. It gets you thinking about character and how language is expressing that character in a more explicit way before you have a moment where you need to really be focusing in on what people are saying instead of just appreciating the coolness of the visuals. And this is one of those moments where, to really understand Ryu as a character, I mean, I don't think he's super complicated, but this is one of those ones where, this is the most important moment for him. He's got his fur coat kind of flailing in the wind, the pointed finger, not actually about his technique, but just calling out Yuta as this kind of glows at the front of his face. We get the really soft eye here. All of that intensity from the other scene is kind of lost. The focus is still there, but you see he almost looks blissful in this moment that he's finally getting to let all of this out. And being able to experience that through these nice lines of dialogue here, and then melted Okotsu's heart, that Yuta doesn't actually care to. It still gets through to him. It still melts his heart. We still get this smile here. But at the same moment that we as the audience are really getting to the meaning of dessert and what Ryu's been searching for this whole time, which is just a chance to finally use his technique at its full power and express himself totally and engage with this thing that he loves about life and really just drop all of his guises and be fully himself for a moment here. As we're understanding that, Yuta is understanding that too. And so it's a very beautiful moment. He still looks so creepy. I don't know if it's just Yuta's design, but he still looks so freaky in this scene. But yes, peak. Meow, meow. Hey. So peak. But yeah, Beam Clash, absolutely peak. I mean, seeing the 2 colors come together, the blue, the pink, colliding in the middle and creating this yellow that's kind of flying out from it. Then we get the big shot of the city again, talking about the cityscape and the space and how the size of these attacks kind of demonstrates power. Again, as I said earlier, I kind of think it's better when it's a little bit more specific destruction, like seeing Ryu cut out like 1 floor of a building versus something on this scale, but it still works really well. And the fact that they kind of held it until later in the episode, so they had only like a floor getting cut out or part of a building getting cut out, to then have something on this scale happen, actually does make this work a lot better, because now we feel the escalation in power. It's not like we're just totally leveling cities and buildings from the beginning. This is, a step up from the other stuff, so it does make it feel a little bit more powerful in comparison. It's also a nice detail to have Yuta's attack be kind of feeling like it's getting leaned back or pushed over by Ryu's, as we see the blue taking up more space kind of on this diagonal than the pink is. The pink energy kind of falling away a little bit more. We see, beams of blue shooting over onto Yuta's side, lines of pink shooting over onto Ryu's side. So that sensation of the mixing and the recombination, the follow-up shot being, I mean, this is so awesome. The like fog and the sweeping energy all around Ryu, then turning into this like point of light coming out of the, scene of destruction in Ryu's perspective, imagining this next beam, the next clash that's about to happen. But this time, it's Yuta putting his original plan into effect. He's not going to beam clash with Ryu anymore. He's chasing it up the side. So the kind of mystery created by the fog leading into the sneak attack by Yuta is really cool. I love the like 1, 2, 3 shot there, getting a couple different angles on the power of the beam. And this one is just incredible, man. All this debris in the foreground here, looking amazing. The bend of the beam being mirrored by this kind of bend in his body. Giving that sense of the kind of backwards momentum, his hands like reaching out behind him also almost to brace, the way that his like, butt's kind of sticking out here over his knees. You get the sense that he's getting shot backwards by the force of this thing that's exploding out of his head. And the way that it's kind of like ripping all of this stuff up off the ground as it's going out is, I mean, it makes it feel just so supremely powerful, such a big burst of energy. I'm losing my words as this goes on. I say the science of cool, and then I get here and I just draw little lines on things and I just say, it's just cool, deal with it. But, that's facts. This is also a really cool moment when Ryu's dialogue starts overlapping. The when did he satisfy these conditions? And we can hear two internal voices. Maybe I should play it. You can hear the multiple internal voices kind of happening as you get that sensation of panic from Ryu as he's trying to figure out really quickly what Yuta's powers are and how he was able to do that. This also, importantly, at this point in time, is something that we don't fully have the answers to as the audience. Like, from JJK Zero, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but we only kind of have the idea of what Yuta's technique is. And then seeing the conditions actually be explicitly stated in this scene and explicitly used for the first time after he consumes Uro's arm. That's the first time that we see him go through this whole process ever in the show, right? This explanation moment here is the first time that we actually figure out how Yuta's curse technique works. Again, adds that degree of mystery where it's normally you would expect to know that about the main character that you're rooting for. That's crucial information to who they are that you think you would be provided with. But since you're not from Yuta, there's that extra distance where at the same time that you're trying to figure out what's going on with his opponents and how he should go about beating them, you're also trying to figure out what's going on with Yuta. So really that sense of darkness and deceit and mystery and all of this that kind of surrounds Yuta, despite him being one of our main characters who we really love and, we feel really close to and we know he's a good guy, but it just kind of complicates our image of how we kind of experience him. Then Yuta's 5 minutes runs out. Ryu's curse technique is totally burnt out. We see, the hair is all the way out now. And they kind of both have this moment where they realize, there's only one thing left to do. Megami and Registar have this, obviously, in the last episode where they're both of their curse techniques are burned out. And they kind of walk across the pool and they're looking at each other well, there's only one thing left. I think Registar even says that explicitly. So now they step in and they go hand to hand. And again, this is a dynamic that was established earlier in the episode when Yuta steps into the beam barrier and Ryu says, want to go. They've both been trying to find out clever ways around each other throughout this whole fight. And then in that moment, they kind of are just fuck it, I guess we'll just go hand to hand since we can't figure out anything better. And this is another one where they're all right, we're both out of options here. We both, don't know exactly what our next move is supposed to be. Yuta doesn't have Rika anymore, so his curse technique isn't really online. Ryu's totally burnt out, so they've just got to settle this with hands. And the foreshadowing and that wanna go and the dynamic that I think that kind of established just carries over so well into this scene. The whisper as he is talking about the dessert and then throwing the hands, how the dessert mixes itself into this scene and the punching sounds as the dessert gets consumed. I mean, such a weird choice, but one of those things that JJK has been doing a lot this season, a point that I've made in pretty much every video up to this point, is that JJK is making a real effort to distinguish itself from the rest of anime as a genre by making these really creative, weird direction choices that it would be a lot harder for a less popular show to make, but I think first off, people are going to watch JJK no matter what. So when they take risks like that, having cake get eaten overlaid with the punch sounds in the middle of a climactic fight, that's a crazy risky choice. People really might have ended up not liking it, but people do because JJK is already such a ubiquitously loved story and because people respect what it's been up to this point so much. They can get away with that stuff. They can also get away with it because Gege wrote such awesome characters. Ryu is just kind of so cool. His whole aesthetic and his dessert ideal is something that just feels really real and infinitely engaging. And the level of passion that he brings to the fight and the level of excitement that he brings makes it so that we're really interested in his internal world and what he cares about. And seeing him get that sweet aftertaste for his life that he's been looking for is something that actually feels fulfilling to us as audience members who have been rooting against Ryu for basically this entire fight. We're actually glad to see this happen for him. And it kind of puts this really wholesome spin on that, again, the character who loves fighting trope that we see generally be so dark and so violent in anime. It puts a really wholesome spin on it. That's a lot of fun and very original. And again, breaks him out of these very traditional masculine ideals of duty and responsibility. And, you got to do this the right way and be competent in this and take care of your family this way. As he kind of breaks out of this and his rocker aesthetic and his fixation on this idea of having something sweet, even if there's no great grander conflict that he's necessarily falling into. I think we can all kind of relate to this desire to just have something more, have something a little bit more meaningful in our lives. And so we end up being just genuinely glad to see him do this. So it works on the character level, but then on the direction level, I think it also works so well because as Mappa takes these real risks, like we see in the Yuji versus Hikari conversation, when they go out on a limb like this, people tend to dig into the story a little bit more and ask themselves, okay, they're making these really creative artsy choices with the visuals. Is this genuinely just slop writing, or is there something else to dig into here? Should we spend our time analyzing this more deeply? They start asking questions like, why did they have that, 4-minute long rotoscoped scene? That's so crazy. That's such an interesting choice. Why do they do something like that? You ask that question when you see the dessert. And even more than that, it's easy to just kind of look at it as a little bit more close to high art, like great works of film or great works of literature, when you have something that is so clearly aesthetically similar to what you would see in like a great work of film. It's easy to look at like a Tarantino movie and be like, oh, this is something that's great and we should analyze it and break it down and try and really understand it. And it's not really the way that the JJK fandom has traditionally approached JJK. But season 3 is kind of demanding that you do that by putting a lot of these incredibly visually interesting things and a lot of these really interesting filmmaking choices in front of you and saying, tell me that this isn't deep. Tell me that this isn't high art. When you're looking at moments like a cake getting eaten by the sound of punches, it's just, this whole season is just a total artistic explosion. And in a lot of ways, I think it's to make the point that the story underneath all of this beautiful aesthetics and the beautiful visual choices and stuff like that is something that's worthy of having this great art and great direction representing it. And of course, the fight ending with Ryu's own beam hitting him. The shot of the empty dessert plates. I'm full. And then this shot of Yuta. I love this so much. If we're talking about expression work, this is maybe the best one in this whole episode. He's still got his hands up like he's ready for the next thing to potentially happen in their fight. He's still ready to go. In a way, it's also kind of showing that Yuta is not full. He's got more left to give. Like, he's not totally out of energy in this moment. So, Ryu's hit his limit, but Yuta hasn't necessarily. And maybe that's why Ryu was able to hit his limit. But yeah, the real soft, kind of smiley expression from Yuta here, showing kind of the understanding and the kindness that Yuta has. He's trying to relate to these people ultimately throughout the whole fight. He even tries to relate to Kurorushi and understand Kurorushi a little bit because, his character is fundamentally about love and about building relationships. If you remember back in JJK 0, he didn't feel like he should be able to go to school and have friends because Rika had hurt people in the past, and he was blaming that on himself. And over the years, he's finally warmed up to the idea of having friends, and he's developed this relationship with Maki that's really deep, really personal, a strong friendship between the two of them. And now he's connecting to, the younger students from the school as he's met Yuji, and they've set up on this mission together. And ultimately, his goal here is to try and take care of Gojo by finishing up the culling game stuff before he has to come back. So Yuta is this very empathetic, passionate person who's all about taking care of other people and loving other people as much as he can. And so to see him kind of express that in his own way through his fighting by going all out with Ryu to defeat him, it's just beautiful and kind of just showing he's, really happy with the outcome and satisfied by how their fight has ended and glad that he could kind of help Ryu out, looking at him as kind of a friend in this moment. It's beautiful and leads really well into the next conversation bit. So yeah, this is the piece of dialogue that I was talking about earlier when Ryu says, were you having a lover's spat to Yuta about him and Uro, which is obviously a joke here, but Yuta does say something like that because he's feeling, on some level, there was a lover spat between Uro and his ancestor that she was kind of taking out on him. So he's like, kind of that was the case. Again, expressing on some level that he really has kind of taken the time to understand these people and, care about them a little bit and try and see it from her perspective. And, in the next lines, he acknowledges that there's nothing I can say to that woman. Anything I say will lead to violence because I'm blessed. So he's acknowledging in this moment that he does have privilege as such a talented sorcerer and as somebody who has people around him that love him and care for him and see him and value him for who he is. The people in his life give him a name and they care about him, and he's not just a tool to them. And Uro has never had that kind of relationship around her. And, he's acknowledging in this moment that the reason why it's easy for me to look at her and say, don't be selfish, care about other people, is because I've been cared about. And I believe that there is genuine love and care in the world. And I can see why you wouldn't think that way. This also just such another awesome shot. I mean, not that I really need to draw this one up, but, again, we're talking about foreground and then the really interesting depth with the city. These two just kind of nice sitting together with a beautiful blue sky in front of them. The sky being kind of the dark morning kind of sunrise light, I think is what was going on there for most of the episode. And then popping open to a nice, easy blue sky after the conflict is over. And having these two who just, fought to the death just kind of chilling next to each other is a very uniquely JJK kind of thing to have happen in a scene like this, is they just kind of have a nice casual conversation. Again, we don't hear that much dialogue from Ryu at any point in time, but having him be able to just kind of chop it up casually with Yuta after this fight, acknowledging that Yuta has really fulfilled his desire and he's gotten everything he wanted out of this, it shows that the binaries of good guy and bad guy aren't something that apply super well to JJK, which is true for a lot of characters, but it's especially true in the culling games. We've seen complicated morality with Higuruma this season, how Yuji kind of encountered that, and it's going to be a continuing theme as the story goes on. But yeah, Yuta's kind of acknowledging here that, just because somebody's participating in the culling games doesn't necessarily mean that they're an evil person. They're just looking for something, and Yuta is willing to engage with them on that level. He's not thinking himself as morally superior in any way in this moment. And I kind of just want you to listen to this next dialogue from Uro here. Yeah, so obviously the one to talk about here with that. I mean, this guy. The point that Uro's trying to make here that's going to be incredibly important for the story moving forward is that people like Sukuna and Kenjaku are only concerned with themselves. All of their actions are only for themselves. And essentially that way of thinking never runs out of stamina. Whereas for somebody like Yuta, who's trying to be selfish all the time, she's kind of saying that hits a point where you can't do it anymore. When it comes down to your survival and you've thrown your whole life on the line for other people, and maybe you see that getting disrespected in the way that Higuruma has. Actually, Higuruma is a great example of this. Geto is a great example of this. They were selfless people up to a certain point, but when it got to a space where it was damaging, their mental health to a certain degree, it was ruining their faith in human society, they snapped and they turned on the people that they were supposed to be protecting. And kind of what Uro's saying here is that happens to everybody eventually when they're trying to be when they're trying to be selfless. But if you're a person like Sukuna or Kenjaku who pursues your goal for purely selfish purposes, there's no moment of snapping. There's no breakdown, because it's not like you're using your energy to support anybody else. It's not like you're putting yourself on the line for anybody else. Everything that you have, everything that you do is only because you want to do it, because you think it's worthwhile. And it's not like there's a way for that mentality to run out. The reason why Higuruma and Geto snap is because they no longer want to protect these people. They no longer see the value in protecting these people. Their duty no longer aligns with their real deep desires. Geto's real deep desire becomes to kill non-sorcerers and tear down human society. But Sukuna never has to act in defiance of his real deep desires for some sense of nobility or anything. He just has to do what he feels like. And there's no amount of strain that you can put on somebody where that can stop being true. Do you know what I'm saying? I hope that this is making sense. Acting in your own interest is never something that you can get tired of. And so she's saying that while Yuta's pursuit is very noble and his ideals are very noble, at some point he's not going to be able to contend with people who think in purely self-centered ways. And the other thing that's really important is from the beginning of this episode, right? We see Yuta here talking about, I won't let you kill your best friend twice. I'll be the one to kill Kenjaku. I'll obtain 400 points on my own. So what he's talking about is he feels indebted to Gojo for taking him in and bringing him to Jujutsu High. He understands that Gojo is a person who's primarily viewed as a weapon by the Jujutsu world, that people don't care about Gojo Satoru the person as much as they care about Gojo Satoru, the strongest sorcerer, this extremely powerful guy who could upset the balance of the Jujutsu world at any given point in time. Again, something I've talked about in my other videos is that ultimately Gojo in this world decides who wins and who loses. Anybody that opposes him, he can put down, and anybody that he supports, he can take straight to the top of the world. And a big part of the reason why Gojo gets into education is to raise up strong sorcerers who can compete with him and thus can kind of balance out the power in the world so that all of the responsibility won't fall on his shoulders. Yuta's kind of ideals throughout the season focus on trying to take on some of the responsibility that was once Gojo's. And in this scene, he's very explicitly saying, the whole responsibility of the world has fallen on your shoulders for so long, Gojo. Now I'll take on the full responsibility of earning all the 400 points by myself, of killing Kenjaku by myself. I won't burden anybody else with that responsibility, and I'll finally be able to take that burden off your shoulders like I know you've always wanted somebody to do for you. But another point of what Uro's saying is that if you think like that, I'll become powerful to protect Gojo. I'll do everything to protect Gojo's feelings. I'll do everything to protect the people that I care about. Eventually, that mindset will run out of steam before the mindset of people who are thinking, I'll dominate the world, I'll kill people, I'll fight because it's what I desire to do. I feel like doing it, and as long as I feel like doing it, I'll do whatever it takes to become the most powerful. That's really what Sukuna is. You know, not to get into manga spoilers, but at some point, that's going to come to a head for Yuta. There's going to be a moment where he's trying to fill Gojo's shoes. He's going to want to be the strongest. He's going to want to solve all the problems by himself. And there's going to be a lot of times where that's not going to work out for him. And we're going to have to contrast that with the other mentalities of the characters in the story, whose approaches end up being more or less effective. But yeah, I think that that's all I have to say for this portion of the video. All right, let's exit out of Crunchyroll. That is, I think, 2 hours and 45 minutes of footage that I'm going to have to edit down. So, gosh, I guess I'll post this in 5 months. It's April 12th right now that I'm finishing recording. So we'll see how long this takes. Okay, wow. If you made it through the absolute marathon that was that last section, thank you so much for watching that. That took, as you can imagine, forever to make, but I don't know. I felt like that was the right thing to do for this episode in particular, where I feel like there wasn't as much story stuff to talk about, but the visual design was so important. Also, sorry, I'm sick now. I was sick in the last video, and then I got not sick in the middle of making that one that you just watched, and now I'm sick again. Just a couple things to wrap up before we head out here. If you were interested by why I put the picture in earlier that I said was a secret and then I was lying to you, it's because the picture that I chose that pairs up with Yuta in the scene in the museum is actually a painting of Sugawara Michizane. So if you don't remember, Sugawara Michizane is the historical figure that Yuta is supposedly descended from, that Gojo finds out about during JJK 0. And Sugawara Michizane was like a real historical guy from Heian era Japan. He was a politician and a scholar, part of the Sugawara clan, and he got very popular and rose to some significant power before eventually being exiled by members of the Fujiwara clan, who he kind of opposed pretty frequently throughout the course of his political career. There was some dispute with like an emperor or somebody new took over and then kicked him out. A couple years later, he dies in exile, and then drought and plague just totally takes out Japan, and there's these huge storms, and lightning struck the imperial palace many times and actually killed a few members of the Fujiwara clan and like all of the emperor's sons. Many came to view that whole crazy weather experience as a curse laid on the Fujiwara clan by Sugawara after his death, and a shrine was built in his name to appease him. Now, this myth grew over the years, and he became kind of deified, coming to be known as a god of storms and the sky. He's now known as one of the Onryo, O-N-R-Y-O, Onryo, but one of Japan's great vengeful spirits, which have been turned into Shinto deities. So these are like people who died and then are now viewed as spirits who have come back and taken their revenge on the people who killed them. So this is really neat on the level that he's, you know, the ancestor of Gojo and Yuta. Of course, we knew that already, but he's not a Fujiwara. Yuta could be Fujiwara from later down this bloodline or on his other side, but he's at least not Fujiwara on one side. So Uro may be wrong to have associated Yuta with the Fujiwara, but I think even more compellingly, what do we know about Uro, right? She was unnamed, her deeds were likely attributed to the men of the Fujiwara clan, she gets thrown under the bus for this murder she didn't commit, and then presumably killed for it, and that's why she comes back with like the dark reincarnated eyes like Toji does. It kind of seems like she was brought back to life earlier, and then was turned into a cursed object and then brought into the culling games. So like she died, came back, got turned into a cursed object, and then came into the culling games instead of just getting turned into a cursed object with no like actual death in the middle. So right, she hates the Fujiwara clan because of this life that she's lived. She's been kind of hidden in the shadows, and a lot of her work has been overwritten by the men who are controlling her, and her ability is sky manipulation. I think you already know where I'm going with this. It almost feels like she might be Sugawara Michizane, or like she might be the apparition that we're referring to when we talk about Sugawara Michizane, the vengeful spirit, because I mean, she is vengeful. She does have sky and storm related powers like Sugawara is said to. If she could come back from the dead, one would assume she would kill some members of the Fujiwara clan. We know that, you know, she got executed for some political turmoil, and that's why Sugawara got banished, was in the middle of some political turmoil, and we know that a lot of her deeds were, overwritten with the names of men from the Fujiwara clan. Is it impossible that she did all of this and then it was attributed to Sugawara Michizane? I almost feel like that's what the story is implying. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Uro is like Yuta's ancestor per se. It seems like the kind of thing where maybe Sugawara got exiled in like the JJK storyline. He gets exiled. Uro independently does some vengefulness on the clan and it gets misattributed to Sugawara. But then again, Sugawara would still have to be a powerful sorcerer, so I don't know. I'm just saying it's like not impossible that there's another level of connection going on here. I didn't want to put it in the main video because I don't have a hard takeaway, but that's something. Okay, so now that that's all settled, here we have a tier list of my favorite anime. I made a discussion post recently talking about what I was going to do for chill time, like the final segment of this video. I have like if you're new here, I have a little segment in all of my videos where I do stuff that's more like that craft segment, but also sometimes just like more general discussions of the work. And I didn't know what to do for this episode, but I was going to do, some hot takes on well-written versus poorly written anime. And I'm not going to add much more to this video. The runtime is already way too long. I'll do that eventually. Maybe I could make a whole video out of that. But yeah, I'm going to have to start moving off of doing just JJK now that season 3 is wrapping up. So let me know any of these anime on here that you would want to see me do. Boruto here is a stand-in for Dandadan. Like I said, this is just a ranking of my personal favorites. Some are kind of low here, like Chainsaw Man, just because it's only the one season of the movie and I haven't seen the movie yet. The only one on this list that I genuinely did not really enjoy watching very much was Fire Force. Even that, I liked at the beginning. It just kind of petered off for me in season 2. But yeah, everything up here is some of my favorites of all time, Dandadan, Kame ga Kill, My Hero, are just all awesome. These ones in this S tier are all ones that have had just kind of a massive impact on my life in one way or another. These are all incredibly important shows to me. I don't know what order I would actually put them in. If I had to, it would probably be maybe. That might be my favorites, but Attack on Titan's so low in that. That's crazy. And yeah, after season 3, JJK probably would have been somewhere in here. Before season 3, it has hopped up to join Haikyuu in the SS tier. My favorites of all time, I would say tied for first place. Haikyuu is one that's my favorite just because it's so special to me personally in the moment in time that I watched it in my life was just I was a high school athlete that just cared way too much about sports, and Haikyuu I think is just a beautiful love letter to sports in general. I think Haikyuu's awesome. It's more just kind of like a personal relationship to the show that has it so high for me. I don't know if it'll ever get usurped in my number 1 spot, but JJK is getting awful close. Also, if you want to count Avatar and The Legend of Korra, I would put them up in this SS tier as well. But yeah, not going to do the whole segment, maybe for another day. Let me know if you want to see a video on any of these topics. I think if I do another anime next, it will be Attack on Titan. But I also have some videos lined up for Dandadan versus Berserk. I actually have some hot takes about Dandadan and Berserk and how they do SA representation, because I think Dandadan does it better. A lot of people won't like that. And yeah, I have a Full Metal Alchemist video that I could drop too that I think would be interesting. But yeah, I'm still going to make the Hikari and Nobara video. I'm still going to make the follow-up video to my Power Systems video that I made earlier in January. I just wanted to, because I haven't really taken the time to do it, I just want to thank you guys so much for all the support. I feel like I'm not fully able to feel it in the moment that I'm at right now because I'm, less than a month away from graduating college, which is insane, and there's so much going on. And, I've been working away at this video and stuff, and I haven't really had time to just kind of sit and feel it out. But, candidly, I've been making YouTube videos for 5 years. They never picked up a lot of traction. I was talking about a whole different group of stuff. I used to do anime, and then I moved on to talking about YouTube itself, and that is the content that I'd ultimately like to get back to, is kind of YouTube meta-analysis, but that's far down the line. But yeah, in January when I made that power structures video, and so yeah, I mean, YouTube wasn't really something that was working out for me, even though it was kind of a dream always to do it. And then in January, I uploaded that power structures and JJK video. The file name is literally the hailmary.mp4 because I was like, I want to do YouTube, but it's the end of senior year. I'm going to have to focus on applying to jobs, and I'm going to have to start a career and, whatever. And I want to take this last Hail Mary at, maybe doing YouTube full time. And I sent it out there and it did incredibly well. I had 740 subscribers when I posted that back in January. We're now over 9,000, which is just unbelievable. And, I was complaining a little while ago about how broke I was and how, I really wanted to get the money and stuff from YouTube. And now here we are, and I've gotten paid. And you guys are literally putting food on the table for me now, which is just so awesome.
You know, again, I feel like I haven't had a moment to really sit back and just kind of like feel the feelings about how cool this is and how excited I am about it. But this is just like the most awesome opportunity ever that you guys have given to me. And I'm hoping to keep pursuing this and then hopefully relatively soon go full time on YouTube and be able to just pump out videos. Future's looking bright for your boy, and it's mostly because of you guys. So I want to thank you so much for all that. If this is your first time coming by this channel and you made it to the end, thank you so freaking much. I mean, for all of you who made it to the end here, thank you so freaking much. That's crazy that you stuck it out with me like this. Yeah, I guess I'm really grateful for all the support and how well this has gone recently. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time. Let me know about the other anime that you might want to hear about. And again, Hikari and Nobara video plus the second part to the Power Structures video coming soon, I promise. Love you guys so much. I'll see you soon.